Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the One More Jump podcast by Rise Pole Vault. Today's episode is with Chris Chappell, part of the legendary Chappell family who has been running UCS Spirit for a really long time. And we wanted to have him on because I wanted to hear about that story of how UCS came to be one of the legendary pole manufacturers in history. And it was so cool to hear about that background. And Chris and I have become friends off the camera, and we've had incredible conversations that I really wish would have been recorded. So I reached out to Chris and I was like, dude, we got to get on the podcast so we can have one of these epic conversations for everyone else to enjoy. And we did, and it was a long one, and we went in deep. But that's just what's fun about doing long form content is we can just talk and talk and talk, and we probably could have went for a lot longer than we actually did. But without further ado, hope you guys enjoy this podcast with Chris Chappell. And
It's good
it's
to
I really
talk pole
appreciate
vault.
it though. I
We can
appreciate
talk
it.
pole vault all day, every day. So that's all good.
Yeah, and the
Love pole
reason
vault.
why I wanted to, one of the reasons why I wanted to do it is because you and I have had so many conversations on the phone where I've just been like, dude, I wish that these were recorded because we've had really good quality just discussion and conversation about like some of the awesome parts of our sport, some of the pain points, and it's
Mhm.
just been I was just like, dude, we got to get Chris on so we can just like hash it out. Because I feel like people would really benefit from those conversations we had on the phone and things like that. And yeah, so anyway, I appreciate it. And I guess we could probably just start off with like for people who are unfamiliar with you, like what's your title and your role at UCS? And kind of just like a background into your family and like the history of your family and UCS Spirit.
Sure. Um, my story starts well before I was even a inkling.
Mhm.
Um, so my grandfather, way back in the day, started Pacer. So he wasn't he was a track buff. He loved track and field. He he didn't do it in college or anything like that, but he got into it actually through the army. So he was in the army. They were World War II fighting, and then they'd have these off days, these field days, and he started. They would do track. They would run. They would pole vault, and so he got into pole vaulting. I think he jumped like 11 feet or something like that. And when he came home from the war, he got a job doing a print. He had a printing press business, so he sold printing presses. But he went to his nephew's track meet, and he's looking around and he sees the high jump. His nephew's a high jumper, and they had a 2x4 with nails in it, and that's how they raised the bar, every inch or whatever.
Right.
And he was pretty crafty and he was pretty handy guy. So he's like, I could probably build something that we could, adjust, slide it up and down and do this. So he started building high jump standards in his garage on the side. Took it to a couple of meets. People liked it. He started selling them. That turned into pole vault standards. And he really revolutionized the pole vault in the way that before he started he's the first guy that made standards that would roll to adjust the depth.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. Before
That's so
that,
cool.
they were, it might be a post, in a tire with concrete, right? And the guys would hold their poles up. They'd see, okay, I think I want to go a little bit this way. And they kind of would shimmy the thing over. And that's how they moved their standards. They would do it by themselves.
That's crazy.
They weren't jumping that super high like they are now, of course.
Yeah.
And so this was in the like early 60s
Hmm.
where it started to sort of get traction and pick up. So, he made these standards that would roll back and forth, went to a couple of meets, and he ended up sitting next to Herb Jenks, who invented the fiberglass vaulting pole. Actually, this was in the 50s. So Herb Herb had a company that was making fishing rods. Styloflex, I think is what it was called. And they made fiberglass fishing rods, mostly fishing blanks. So people would buy the blank, they would put the eyelet holes in it, or there was different stuff they would do to it to kind of make it their own.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at an Elks Lodge meeting and he ran into Bob Matthias's coach, who was actually he ran into somebody else that was like, "Hey, my nephew or son or whatever pole vaults. You should try doing this pole vault thing." And he's like, "That sounds interesting. Okay, cool." So he did that. He spliced two tuna fish rods together. Those are like the big fishing rods. Like they would fall
Yeah,
huge,
I imagine they've got to be
right?
pretty big to pull in a tuna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so he's like, well, to hold a human being, like it's got to be a little bit stronger, or whatever. So he kind of figured out this process to make a big, long, sturdy tube. And the first iterations were these two rods that they molded together. And then he figured out a way to make them longer and longer. And then he ran into Bob Matthias's coach, and that's when it really started to take off. And of course, he's a decathlon Olympic champion. And I
Mm-hmm.
think he might have had the world record too. Um, and so that sort of started to gain traction, and that's when fiberglass poles started to really kind of pick up. And that didn't happen until like the late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And then so my grandfather sits next to Herb, and Herb's like, "Look, man, I don't like dealing with people. I love creating the product." And they struck up a deal, and my grandfather's like, "Yeah, I'll sell your poles." It was a catapult.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a deal where my grandfather George was the distributor for Catapult, and that went on for quite a long time. And then he got really good with the standards. He started making hurdles. It's called the rigid L hurdle. If you look that up, that was his kind of big design that really revolutionized hurdle racing, where the hurdle was a metal L and it would tip when the athlete hit it. Before then, it might just be, wood blocks or whatever. So
Wow.
that relationship started him into the whole process and that sort of side of things. So they were Catapult when they made the black cat and the green cat.
Uh-huh.
So like in the 72 Olympics, when the green cat was banned,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather had gone to the Munich Olympics and he brought documentation that showed we've shipped these poles to everybody in the world. It was um I can't think of all the names, but Wolfgang Nordwig was the big one. He was the East German that was kind of not really favorited because Bob Seagren was jumping really, really well, and of course Jan Johnson was jumping well from the U.S. I think Steve Smith was the other American, and they were all, jumping great. Bob had broken the world record a couple of times in the Green Cat. The Olympic Charter says that the product has to be available to everybody, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, this is a way long-winded story, by the
No,
way.
this is all very interesting. There's already a lot of stuff that I had misconceptions of, so this is
Mm.
really cool.
Well, if you have any questions or whatever, stop me and I'll
Yeah,
try
yeah,
to
yeah,
I'll
for
try to
sure.
answer. So anyway, he argued with the Olympic Committee saying, sorry, the Olympic Charter is that has to be available to everybody. And it's a fairness kind of a rule. So it's like a company can't just make a special unique thing for one athlete and make it available right before the games and
You
boom,
mean
off and
like
running.
it needs to like the product like that like the implement that they're using like
Well,
has to be available.
it's that for in our case for pole vault, yeah, the implement, but it could be like in swimming. This I don't know if you remember this. Was it 2000? I think it might have been 2000. The 2000 games, the Speedo had come out with a new swimsuit,
I
and
think I do vaguely remember that. Yeah.
and so there was all this discussion as to whether or not it would be legal, and that legality all had to do with the availability.
Of
Was
it
that suit
to everyone needs to have access to it
right? So
in
you
order for it
couldn't
to be
just
legal.
make a special swimsuit for the Americans, and they have
Yeah. That's interesting.
unfair advantage.
I could see a lot of gray area in that.
Oh, for sure. For
right?
sure. But that was the argument that the Olympic Committee made that said, well, only the Americans, and really there's a magazine in France. It's called L'Equipe, and it's like a sporting magazine. And they had written an article saying that this pole, the green cat, was special made, like cost $10,000 a pole, all this stuff. And that's why Seagren was jumping world records and da, 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 da. So
Right.
anyway, the committee's like, can't use him. So he goes and I don't know how he does it, but he gets a meeting in front of some of the top committee members. And he's like, look, I can show you. Here's the shipping records to Germany, to Sweden, to, this country, to that country. Greece, they had a pretty good vaulter. And so they said, okay, well, this is all really compelling. We're going to issue or create a czar that's going to inspect the polls, and they'll determine, whether these polls are legal or not.
Mm,
So they kind of reversed course for about a day, and then they came back and they said, nope, they're not going to let him take the polls.
that's crazy.
So that, yeah, it was wild, but that's kind of the beginning of my story, because that's after that Olympic Games, my grandfather took my mom's family to England, and my dad is British.
Mhm.
And so they go to England, and there's a post-Olympic event in England that it's a track meet where they have all the Olympians and everything, and then some of the rising British kids. My grandfather's or my dad is one of these rising British guys, except that he had pulled his hamstring, so he wasn't going to compete that day. So he's in the stands, and he's kind of like you and I. I mean, he's a geek about pole vault. He'll talk
Yeah.
all day, every day.
Right.
So he knows who my grandfather is. Never had a chance to meet him, so he gets to meet the famous George Moore, and he meets my mom. He's a local London boy, so he's like, hey, you guys are here for a couple of days. Let me show you around. Da, da, da. So he takes their family all around London, and then they keep in touch for about 2 years, I think, writing letters back and forth. And then my mom went back to Europe to kind of travel Europe with one of her girlfriends, and they fell in love, and he loved pole vaulting. So he graduates college, wants to pursue teaching. So he comes to, and at the time, California, San Jose in particular, was a big hotbed for track athletes. That's where Bruce Strenner was training. Mac Wilkins is a good thrower at the time,
Uh-huh.
good coach now. Bunch of guys. The San Jose Track Club was kind of a big track club. So he's like, well, shoot, I can pursue pole vault. I'm going to move to America. So he comes to the US, he's pursuing his teaching degree, falls in love with my mom. They end up getting married, and the state of California does like a across the board hiring freeze for teachers.
Oh,
So he's like, well, shoot, what am I going to do now?
what are the
And
chances? That's crazy.
yeah, well, my grandfather's like, well, why don't you come work in the plant at Pacer, and we'll, you can kind of figure it out from there.
Okay,
So he's,
really, really quick. So Pacer, so Catapult and Pacer, when did Pacer,
oh,
like, when did that start? Because that's the part that
yeah,
I didn't know about. I didn't
good
know
question.
that the whole Pacer thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so sorry, the Pacer, I think they started Pacer in like 1968, something like that.
And this is your grandfather.
Yes. And so basically, he's selling pull-up standards, high jump standards, hurdles, um, some other, track and field equipment. I think he's had some javelins, maybe, shot puts, some things like that. Mostly started out of his garage, and then eventually he quit his job doing the printing press and went all in on Pacer. And then at one point he partnered with a company that was AMF.
Hmm.
AMF. Well, actually, hold on. I got to think about this for a second. Pacer International was, he had partnered with a gymnastics company, where they had like track and field and gymnastics equipment. And then AMF became interested in that. And AMF was like this big conglomerate.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably in 74 or so. And when AMF became interested, they sold the company to AMF, and they were part of like AMF Voight, AMF Bowling. Um, AMF had the gymnastics division. We were the track and field division, or my grandfather was a track and field division. And at that time, Herb was kind of going through some, not turmoil, but changes with Catapult, where
Mm-hmm.
it was the Duraflex Catapult, I think. And he sold to Browning Arms Company,
Mm-hmm.
and he made the Catapult with Browning for a few years. And Browning had decided that
When you say
they're
Browning arms, you mean like the guns?
yes, yep,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. And
That's
well,
interesting.
so they had, guns, bows and arrows, all this kind of stuff. And
Right.
the fishing rods was the big interest for Boeing,
Okay.
or for Boeing, for Browning.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were making the Catapult with Browning, and then Browning's structure was that they had kind of their recreation sports and then their like game sports. So they're like hunting and fishing and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And so they sort of spliced the company into these divisions. And I mean, let's face it, like pole vaulting poles are not it's a niche product, right? It's
Oh,
a niche
yeah. Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. For sure.
And when you're talking about like AMF or Browning or even some of the vendors that we deal with now, pole vaulting is such a small
Mm-hmm.
market for them. They're kind of like, well, I mean, what are we? So they didn't have a lot of interest in pursuing the pole side of it, but Herb really was interested in developing other sporting goods products. So like he at the time, no one was really making a fiberglass or composite bike or tennis racket or anything like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That was all not really available yet. Skis, things like that. And so Herb was like, I think we could make some of these things out of fiberglass, out of composites, out of carbon or glass.
Right. Yeah.
And so when Browning was kind of reorganizing things, he's like, I think I'm gonna go do something else. So he left Catapult or left Browning, and my grandfather basically recruited him to Pacer and said, "Why don't you come into Pacer? I've got it worked out with AMF. It will make an R&D division, and you'll head it up, and that's what we'll do." So he did that. So he left, joined up with Pacer, and he made tennis rackets, he made skis, um, all sorts of things, bikes, and he
Right.
kind of experimented with all this stuff. And that's when they created the Pacer 3. And so
Mm.
Seagrin left the Catapult in, I want to say like 74 or something like that, and started jumping on the Pacer 3. And so they made the Pacer 3 from whatever that time frame was. I want to say, yeah, like around 74, 75 until 1986, when my dad left Pacer and created Spirit and joined up with UCS, and UCS Spirit was born.
Gotcha. Wow. That is a lot different than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, so what really happened was AMF had bought Pacer, and the real deal with AMF was that they owned Harley, they owned Hatter's Yachts, they owned everything. I mean, they were huge.
Hmm.
And this one guy wanted, I can't remember his name, but he wanted the yacht portion, and they weren't gonna split it off. So he did a corporate takeover, and he bought whatever 51% of the shares of AMF, and then he liquidated all these divisions, the Voight balls and the bowling side of it, Harley, Hatteras, he kept, and that's when Gil bought Pacer. And that was in like,
Wow. So they started liquidating and selling off all these different things,
mhm,
and then Gil bought Pacer from AMF,
yep, yep.
and then
And they
that's
moved, yeah, and then they took Pacer, the pole manufacturer, and they took it to Champagne.
mhm.
And then at that time, my dad and Lane, they didn't want to go with Pacer to, they didn't want to move really.
Yeah,
And they
right.
felt like, we can, we have kind of an idea of maybe a little bit different design from the Pacer 3, and maybe we can go at it and figure it out. And so they basically, UCS was kind of involved in the possibility of buying Pacer. It was kind of a bidding process and stuff.
And
And
UCS at the time was a just sports equipment manufacturing or
yeah, so
okay.
UCS was started in 67, and they're a whole nother crazy story.
Right.
Um, and so that they were immigrants, and they settled in like the fashion district of New York, and they were seamstresses, and they saw a need for laundry slings. So they made canvas laundry slings, and then that evolved into canvas coverings, awnings, boat covers, things like that. It's the Schwartz family, and they part of their big deal was they would always, whatever they made, they would always deliver it to the customer themselves.
Uh-huh.
And um, Jeff, I don't know how he got interested in track and field. That's right. It was a local high school in New York that wanted new a repair to their high jump pit. They had a block foam covered with like netting,
Yeah.
and so they're like, hey, could you, we heard you guys are, crafty, whatever. So they bring it in, he fixes it up, he takes it out to the track, and he's looking around, same as my grandfather. He's like, this stuff is, we can make something way better than this. This
Right.
looks terrible,
Yeah.
And at the same time, he kind of got interested in kids with special needs and education, and like, how they learn. And there was a teacher that wanted to make these foam blocks for their special ed kids that they could, it was tactile, and they could, feel it, touch it, roll it, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They started making these foam blocks and covering them with this canvas material. So that's kind of what led him into this idea for, like, well, maybe I can make a high jump pit out of this canvas. And then they started
Right.
making gymnastics mats, and that all started to develop and go on. And so that was probably into the 67, so like into the mid 70s. They kind of revolutionized pole vault landing areas, right? I mean,
Right. So
actual
that's what that
foam.
so that's what that was their first kind of venture into track and field was the landing systems. Is
Mhm.
oh wow, that's
Yeah,
interesting. So then
yeah.
so then you said so UCS starts they were going to purchase Pacer from AMF.
They were
They
looking at
didn't
it. Yeah,
they were looking at it,
mhm.
and then your dad and Lane didn't want to move to Champaign, Illinois, so they were like, I want to let's start it with UCS.
Yeah, yeah. And they were kind of looking for investors and stuff. And Jeff is a pretty savvy guy, so he was like, he called my dad, and he's like, hey, I heard that you guys might not be going with Pacer. Is that true? Whatever. And he's like, well, we're considering all our options, this and that. And the next day, Jeff was on a plane to come out here and say, well, what, let's do something.
Right.
And so they partnered up and they created UCS Spirit.
Wow. That's crazy. That's a
Yeah.
wild that's a wild story. A lot of
No,
layers that
yeah,
I didn't
no,
know about. Yeah.
it's so my portion of it is when I was, let's see, it was in 86, so I was like 5 years old, and they created Spirit. And as a kid growing up, my dad's hustling. They're an upstart. They're figuring it out. They're going all over the world, trying to sell poles, trying to get poles in front of people, trying to get poles to athletes. And I mean, some of my fondest memories are going to track meets with my dad, bringing poles to athletes,
Yeah.
and then after the meets, he would always take us down on the field and like fling us into the pit, we'd run
Yeah.
down and grab the pole and he'd, lift us up. And then we always wanted someone to break a crossbar, my brother and I, because it was like, if they broke a crossbar, we got a pole.
Right.
We'd bring it home and we'd pole vault in the front yard, in the backyard. And
That's
um,
awesome.
for me, it's like I think most kids, their families that take them to a ball game or this or that, and it was like we were going to track meets, and
Yeah.
um,
That's
it
how
was
it
just a
was
big,
for me too. Yeah.
yeah, same
Just
thing, right? I mean,
following them around. And I remember when I was younger, there's two things that I remember from being younger growing up. I it's so wild. Um, my dad would take us like hiking and fishing and stuff, and I never wanted to go. I was like, man, I really don't want to go do this. I'd rather just skateboard with my friends. Like, I don't really want to do this. So funny, you know, however many 20 years later, that's my favorite thing to do is to go out into the mountains and be by myself out in the mountains. Like it's my favorite thing to do. And then ironically, when I was younger, I hated pole vaulting because I was like,
oh,
all we do is go to track meets, and all we do is, my dad's watching film and
hmm,
he's, doing this and doing that, and well, we got to wake up early tomorrow and get in the car because we're going to this track meet, and
yeah,
I was like, oh, dude, I don't want to go to another track meet. And then fast forward 20 years later, like my whole life is revolves around pole vaulting, and it's
yeah,
been, an incredible thing to me in my life. That's that is literally what my childhood was too. Is just
yeah.
you just like the smell of the track, the
Oh yeah,
smell of a pole vaulting pit, the smell of just like the field house, like those are the things that like remind me of my childhood. You know,
totally,
it's
totally.
so wild,
It's
pretty
funny.
cool.
I have two kind of comments or and stories, but one is there was a high school about, I don't know, maybe a mile from our the original factory, and
Which was where?
at the in Carson City,
Okay.
which is it's about, I don't know, 10 miles from where we're at now.
Hmm.
We moved to this facility in 2017, and we were in the other one until that point, from 1987 until 2017. So
Oh, wow.
30 years in the same building. And then, but at Carson High, nobody has an indoor track around here. Nobody. And we're kind
Right.
of in the high Sierra Mountains, and so it's like a high desert. So we do get snow, and it's pretty cold in the winter. And like for track, it's a little bit tough for a spring sport because you could have a hailstorm, a snowstorm during the track meet, right?
Right.
Just same there, right?
Oh, yeah.
So nobody has indoor track though, because it's just not enough to really warrant the cost and the expense, I guess.
Right.
So anyway, the high school had a box that they put in the gym, and I can still like just remember it's long gone now, but going into the gym, it was just the feel and the smell and the sights and the sounds. It's like I think the last time I was in there was I was probably 10 at most,
Yeah.
but you can remember it, you can feel it, you can smell it. Like it's just
Yeah.
that's all you know.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. We would always go to this other one that I have is this one meet in Urington, Nevada. And it's like 40 minutes from here, probably. And it's a town of maybe 5,000 people. I mean, tiny little town, small place,
Right.
but we would go to the Urington relays every year without fail because it's just part of what we did growing up. But it was like 100-year-old track meet.
Yeah.
And I mean, and they don't even, I mean, it's all dirt track, but it was always just, it's part of, I don't know, it was just part of growing up. It was just part of what we did. I didn't even know it was, I didn't know kids didn't go to track meets on the weekends, like I just,
Right. I know. And I'm very grateful for it now, but man, back then the last thing I wanted to do was go to a track meet. I don't know.
yeah,
It's so
same thing.
weird.
I'm like,
Yeah.
why are we going to Urington? There's nothing out there. Like, what are we, what are we doing? But now I'm like, man, it was awesome.
Yeah, I
And
know.
that's another sort of funny thing about like my dad is it doesn't matter if Mondo walks in the door and wants to do a tour of the facility, or if it's a high school kid from Urington. He's the same enthusiasm and time spent. It doesn't really matter to him. He's like, it's always been about helping kids, helping athletes do what they want to do. And because it's such a niche kind of a thing, I think he just takes this approach. He remembers the feeling of his childhood. They had an apple tree in their backyard, and he and his brother would compete against each other, and they would rest the like broomstick on the apple tree, and they had, I think, one pole, and they would, try to compete. And I think he knows what it's like to go to meets with limited resource, one or two
Right.
poles, and that's all you have. It's all you get. It's all you can do. And so anytime somebody's looking for something, it's like we do everything we can to try to get it to them. And I think it's just because that's who he is. It's how he's grown up. That's how I was when I was coming up. It was like, this is what
Yeah.
we got. Okay, let's go.
It
Let's do it,
that is I can attest to Chris for sure. I know that everybody else does too, but I've seen you zooming around at US championships and like all these things, just delivering polls, getting polls to the people that they need. And that's one of the things I had written down here is just like your guys' support of post collegiate pole vaulters, elite vaulters that are trying to make it to the next level. It's unbelievable. And you guys are kind of known for just, being really good at that. And it's I've seen it firsthand where it's like, oh man, if Luke, my brother, if we just had this pole, you know, at this meet, but there's just not enough time, and then all of a sudden it's like the pole was at the meet, and it's like, holy cow, I can't believe they pulled that off.
yeah.
So why do you guys why continue to do that? Because that's not easy, and I mean obviously that can't be done for everyone. Um, but you guys, it's probably a difficult question for you guys to like answer because it's like, man, it's tough. It costs money to make these polls, a lot of money to make these polls, and then trying to figure out like who we end up supporting and how we do it. Like why do you guys continue to do that?
Um, I think stability can't be understated.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is um, in an athlete's journey, and we've always had the like consistency matters, and so there's a lot of that. Um, but I think it's we recognize the importance of that in every athlete's journey, right? So whether you're a 10-foot pole vaulter or a 20-foot pole vaulter, having the reliability and the stability helps you to take those steps forward and to make that progress. And I
Right.
think the why is that what we do is super fun.
Hmm.
It's really hard, but it's fun because it's hard. Trying to make those deliveries it doesn't always go smooth, but we always try our
Right.
best. Um, but pole vaulting means a lot to us and to our family, and we want to share that with as many people as we can. And so, on one hand, it's a business,
Mm.
and we have to be able to pay employees and make sure that our people are taken care of, make sure we can cover our costs and things like that. But it's a process and it's a journey. And so I think the answer why there's a book that I read. It's called The Infinite Game,
Mhm.
and it's a really great outlook on, I think, business. because, at the end of the day, like we all have to put food on the table, right? Like
Right.
the world revolves around monetary exchange. And so, but the point of business isn't to be, to make the most money or do the thing. It's to do it as long as you possibly can. And I think for us, it's our purpose is to continue to help people along the way because we have the tools to do it. We've positioned ourselves into a business that we can build these tools that aren't easy to make, that take a lot of time and cost and energy and effort. But at the end of the day, it can change somebody's entire life.
100%.
And
100%. That's the thing. One of the biggest things that I've kind of went on this crusade with one of my business partners, Hunter, on PVR is with like renting poles and it all it has to do with is the fact that the crux of the event is having the right pole at the right time. Like that is
totally,
it. That is
totally.
it. You could have Mondo Duplantis with the wrong pole and he's no longer able to do anything near what he does. And that's why like what you guys do is so incredibly important. And the consistency of the poles, the pole is the crux. That's it. The pole vault, lives and dies by the pole vaulting pole.
Well, I agree. And I think that it's super important and that's not lost on us. And I think it's also, I don't know, we take really great pride in being able to say what we're going to do and do what we say we're going to do and deliver.
Mm,
Like making a promise is it's just it's nothing if it's there's no follow through.
mhm.
And I think having that like ability and stability to be able to do it is the forefront of it all. And for us it's never been about like how many poles you sell or how much money is made. It's only about how did the kid do this weekend? How did that work out? Were we able to get them the product that they needed? Where I use this analogy sometimes where it's like you could have all the material delivered to your job site, to your house, all of the stuff. But if you don't have the right tools to build the
Mm,
house isn't going to have the foundation. It's not going to stay. It's not going to be supported. It's not going to be right.
right.
So that's what we're providing is the tool. You can do all the training in the world, but if you don't have tools that you can rely on, that you can believe in, that you can trust in, it's going to be really, really hard for you to achieve what you set out to do. And
Right.
that's the same whether it's Mondo or it's uh, me when I was pole vaulting. Like I didn't
Yeah.
jump that high, but and it does. I think it does provide opportunities for kids that they wouldn't otherwise have, whether it be a college scholarship or even just the going out and competing in an activity in a sport.
Yeah.
I think for me, why it's so important, why pole vault is so um, such a big part of my life. Obviously, I work in it and all that stuff, but the passion comes from the lessons that I learned on the track and the friends that I made doing it.
Mhm.
Because you're engaging in something that's super hard. You're destined to fail at it, but putting in the work, putting in the time, having the camaraderie, having the competition, those are all things that we carry through our day-to-day lives and I think make for better people so that we can be a better
Absolutely.
community. And I think,
Absolutely. Yeah.
maybe it's too altruistic to think that way, but that's what I believe completely. And it's also why I think it's so important that as a kind of a pole vault community, we love to see people doing things like what you're doing with Rise and bringing people to the pole vault, trying to recruit more people to it, because I
Mhm.
think those lessons and those camaraderies and that specialty, it goes far beyond, I think, what we can even really um, recognize. Like
Yeah, for sure.
I don't. I think a lot about like the pole vault summit as an example, only because it's a big event. Obviously we're very, very involved in it. Um, but I go to other trade shows, I go to other conferences, and they don't have the same feeling. They don't have the
No.
same kind of camaraderie, and it's just I don't know. There's something about pole vaulting that draws people together. Maybe it's the nature of people who are attracted to it, but I also think it's when you engage in an activity that's really, really difficult, and there's other people trying to do the same or similar activity, you have a common thread and a common sort of bond
Hmm.
that's that's unshakable in a certain way, you know?
Yeah, but it's weird. Don't you think like the pole vaulting culture and community, it's weird. Like I've tried to
Mm,
think about why is it that pole vaulters are so obsessed with each other? Like
mm,
why? Why is it? Like is it because it's extremely hard? Is it because they have to come together and pool resources? Is it because all these different things? I can't figure out why, but like I always say that there's in track and field anyway, there's two events that have distinct cultures. One of them is the pole vault and the other one is distance running. Like
mm.
distance runners are like obsessed with each other. Like like I ran cross country and it was like a culture. There was like a culture there. And then in pole vaulting, it's the same thing. I don't know. I think it might be because, it's difficult. There's a high there's almost an extreme sport aspect to it kind of. Um I think it just blends a lot of different things together and yeah, but you're right because at the
Well,
summit it's
maybe
so great. It's so cool, you know?
maybe that's it though. Maybe it is it's not one thing, it's many things, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many facets and different little parts to
It's
it.
just, I think too, one of the most difficult things as a business owner is that the pole vaulting is such a niche event.
Mm.
But
Well,
then
okay,
one of
so
the best things about pole vaulting as the business owner is that it's a niche event. It's so weird,
yeah,
like I think it
but
might be so unique that people get so proud of the fact that it's like, what do you do? And then they get the opportunity to not say I play baseball. Like
yeah,
it's almost like a certain personality person that wants to be like almost like a pioneer or like a
mm-hmm.
somebody who wants to do something different. Like I want to do something different. Like I don't want to do what everybody else in my high school does. I want to do something really unique and cool. What could that be? And then they look over and they see the pole vault and they're like, that's pretty unique, you know?
Well, but so that's interesting because I think there's a lot of different ways people find pole vault. One of my favorite questions is to ask people is like, how did you become a pole vaulter? Like what got you there, right?
Yeah,
And so like Tim Mack is an example. If you haven't read his book, it's a good one too. Above and Beyond, I think
I
it's
have.
called.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah, it's
book.
great. But he talks about getting cut from the baseball team, and that's why he became a pole vaulter.
Mm.
And then like Sam Kendricks is another example where, his dad's like, he wasn't super fast, he's not super strong. So we did pole vault, which is kind of an odd thing to think
Yeah,
about
I know.
because
I was just gonna say that.
but but the point is it's kind of like so sometimes it's people that are maybe they're super good athletes and they kind of have the whole package and they find pole vault because it's really hard to do. And then other times it's people that were bad athletes, but
Hmm.
then found this sort of niche and they ground it out. I mean, Sam's story is a story of grinding, right? Like they vaulted and they vaulted and they vaulted and they learned it and they honed the craft. And the same thing with Tim. He wasn't naturally good at it, but he got good over time.
Yeah,
So, but there's a like similarities in putting in time and effort, and that takes a special kind of person,
right.
and then it takes a special kind of person that is okay being kind of an oddball, like not the one doing all the stuff that all your friends are doing.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to say, you know,
I know.
but for
I know
some
all I know
reason,
is my experience, and I remember distinctly. It's like whenever you go to a barbecue and somebody says, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" As an adult, go to
Mhm.
a barbecue with your family, and you meet somebody new. Hey, what's going on? My name's Jake. My name's Bill. What do you do, Bill? And that's just always that's the adult classic right there. You
Uh-huh,
know, it's
for
like,
sure,
hey, well,
for
what do
sure.
you do? And there's a moment in time there where you either feel an immense amount of pride and joy about what you do, that you're excited to tell them about
Mm,
what you do. But then there's also, or there's the opposite, where it's that you're embarrassed and to tell them what you do and you don't want to tell them what to do, what you
mm,
do. And and I think as an athlete, when you're young and you're in high school, I think that's like that's the equivalent of what happens to them at the barbecue is it's like, yeah, this is
sure.
my daughter Lacey, and yeah, this is Bill. And Bill's like, hey, Lacey, what do you do? Do you do any sports or anything? And then in that moment, I remember when I was a kid being like, oh, dude, I can't wait to tell him. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I'm a pole
So,
vaulter. Because then you get this reaction like, oh my gosh, you're a pole vaulter. I knew a guy that used to pole vault. Those guys are crazy,
yeah, yeah.
like, and then you get to tell them all about it. And I remember feeling such a sense of pride about that because people who you tell that to are genuinely interested because they're like, oh my gosh, I've never met a pole vaulter. I've always wanted to know about these different things, you know?
So that reminds me of a couple of things, but I'll try to keep it limited because I can get long-winded. But
You're good.
uh, so when I met my wife, we kind of did this thing where we sort of dated but didn't date for like a year.
Hmm.
And we refused to admit to each other that we were boyfriend and girlfriend or whatever. But it came to a point where we went to a party, an event, and her parents were there, her dad. And so he's like, "Oh, so Katie's talked about you a little bit, like what's going on, whatever. What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I we make pole vaulting poles." And he's like, "Huh, so you can earn a living doing that?"
Yep. Yeah.
And
That's
I'm
what I
like,
get all the time now.
yeah, exactly. And
Oh,
I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, we do okay or whatever. And but the funny thing is at the time he's like, okay, yeah, like I've heard of pole vault, that's cool. And he kind of thought about it for a minute, and he's like, well, that's a sort of a small industry, this or that. But now he's like the biggest pole vault fan. He watched Mondo's movie. He's watching the Olympics. He's texting me during the games. Hey, what's this and that.
that's
He
awesome.
knows all about it and he loves it. But
Yeah.
it's just so funny because you always run into people, and it's a super interesting conversation because you get those mix of reactions.
Right.
But I think that's why, I don't know, I just think that the people that get drawn to it, we have this sort of, I don't know, it's a weird kind of a bond. And even with our, competitors, people that are, on the other side or whatever, like you see, I don't know, the guys and girls on the field and their, camaraderie, and they hang out after the meet. And like, I
Yeah.
remember watching it was Katie and Nina, like this was years ago. And Holly is kind of in the mix too, and they're all like buddies, off the
Right.
track, and then they step onto the field and everyone is like, this is so bizarre. How can you be such good friends with your competitors?
Right.
But I think we all understand the kind of how I think to me it comes down to the difficulties and the challenges of doing it, right? And trying to
Hmm.
figure it out. You're trying to figure out this puzzle. And at the end of the day, we recognize that, okay, this person maybe is a little bit better gymnastic than I am, or maybe this person's a little bit faster, or this or that person's taller. So they have these advantages or disadvantages, but we're trying to piece this thing together. And we all know it's not about that person doing poorly. It's about how good we do
Hmm.
ourselves. I think that's the other thing that is a draw is that it's a kind of an individual event too. I mean, even though
Right.
you're part of the track team and that matters, it's also you're always trying to do the best that you can do, you
Hmm.
know. And if it's going to be better than somebody on that day, then that's great. But I don't want them to do bad. I want me to do really, really well.
Exactly. It's too hard. It's too hard to
Yeah,
worry about other people and what they're
yeah,
doing. You know what I'm saying?
absolutely. Yeah.
And I think too that we're also the pole vault is so such a niche sport and we're so small that we can't afford to have competitors, like true competitors that we don't like. Like we're too small of a community to do that, you know? And I think we
Mm.
need to people always ask like, well, aren't you afraid that somebody's gonna become a competitor to rise in your area and stuff like that? And I'm like, I spend zero time thinking about that. You know,
I
like,
think it's a waste of time.
yeah, it's a huge waste of time.
I mean,
We're too small of a niche to like have competitors like that. It's just like, no, if somebody came in and we start doing this thing, first of all, it's really difficult. But second of all it's going to do is bring us up. And we all have to be okay with like, hey, there's going to be people that do other things, but we all need to come up together. And I think personally right now, I just thought about this what we were talking about earlier with like your basically all the origins of pole vault companies, as in like manufacturers and stuff like that. Well, maybe not all, but most. And the one that you were talking about earlier with Spirit and Pacer and UCS, it all is out of kind of necessity and lack of resources. Like, so people scrambling together to like put together a better resource, like better standards or better landing systems. And we all have these stories, especially people our age and then older than us, of like going to the meet with one pole vaulting pole that didn't even work, like, and jumping on these terrible pits and things like that. And I think that what you're seeing right now with like clubs coming up and different kind of resources being available to pole vaulters is a result of people just being pissed off from not having enough resources when they were younger. Like where
mm,
like me personally, like
mm,
one of the biggest driving factors behind Rise was I was so sick of being kicked out of the field house. Just
mm.
so sick of it. And just getting walked all over all the time. Oh, you guys have the field house? Nope, not anymore. Baseball needs it. you know? And so
Yeah.
then I was like, you know what? No, we need something. We need something that we can count on and that can be reliable. And the first step was having reliable equipment, in the evolution of pole vaulting. First step was
Mhm.
having reliable equipment that we can use. And you guys have provided that, other manufacturers have provided that, reliable landing systems. So now we have that. And so now it's like, okay, we need facilities now. We need reliable facilities that people can count on to go to every single week and be able to practice their craft.
Well, I
And
think
then, yeah,
a lot of it comes down to opportunity, right? Like
yeah,
if you don't if you don't have that opportunity, you didn't have that opportunity when you were younger, and it's something that you're passionate about building. Obviously, you are because you've created a business out of it. So you're like, okay, at some point you sat down and said, like, I really want to do this. I really want to. What's the quote, right? You find something you love to do and you never work a day in your life,
yeah.
right? So you found something that you love to do and you figured out how to make that your stability in your life, being able to provide food for your family and everything. And so you get to do this passionate thing and you want to share that with other people. And I
Yeah.
think it's born out of that lack of opportunity maybe that you had growing up. Whereas maybe when your dad was coming up, they maybe didn't even have access to the field house at all.
Yeah, they
So,
didn't.
so having 2 nights a week was a win,
Right.
but now I think each kind of generation says, well, can I do if they believe in it, they're passionate about it, they want to do it, they want to pursue it. Okay, can I make it more accessible? Can we get more people involved?
Hmm.
Can we bring this to more people to be a positive influence on their lives?
Hmm.
And I think that's a really important component because it's like you build it and they will come sort of a thing, right? Like you want to play baseball out in the middle of Iowa and there's no field to play in, you're going to build it in a cornfield and people will come play, right? I
Right.
mean,
That's
that's the
exactly
idea,
it.
I think.
Yeah, and that's it's been really interesting, like kind of like the last, 5 to 10 years of, pole vaulting and seeing how much it's grown and how much I think it's going to continue to grow. Just trying to encourage more people like, hey, like you can do this. Like you can have a little facility and you can help support people during, the off season when they're not pole vaulting at their high school. And then there's also, high schools that, just don't have any, like we have high schools around here that is just like, hey, like this is great. We don't have anything at our high school, but the kids want to pole vault at the meets, so we can have some good training for them like during the week or whatever.
Mhm.
So I think it's just
Well,
encouraging more people to like get out there and do it and continue to provide resources and opportunity, like you said.
well, I think that's super important too, is to work with the other things that are happening in the area, right? The other
Hmm.
communities and the other things, because you hear stories about, this sort of competition of people stealing kids away, and there's this competitive element where people want to have the best kid, and that's fine. I think that's okay. I think good amount of competition is helpful. I think when you start to detract and take away from schools or from other things, and it becomes sort of a fight and a clash between, I don't know, maybe egos in a certain way or
Right.
whatever it may be, where I think we have to recognize the where pole vault sits,
Hmm.
where we are. We're not, it's hard for me to hear the conversation and comparison of pole vaulting to major sports or even track and field to major sports, NFL,
Right.
NHL if you're in that part of the country or world. Soccer is maybe not a great example because maybe they're closer to track and field.
In the
But
US at least.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, but recognizing that, okay, this is where we're at. And if there's infighting, that's going to be really hard for the whole
I
thing
know.
to be lifted up and to continue to be a positive influence. I think that's the other element, right? Is making positive impact and positive influence on kids and families. It has
Hmm.
to be priority number one.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah,
then
exactly. And the other thing too is I do think it's probably majority of a pride situation where people kind of just they want credit. They want credit for this or that or the other. We this kid did this because of me. And it's like,
mhm.
nah, that kid did it because it's a good athlete and it's good dedication and, does a good job. But I do think it is silly. And the way that I've always told our people to how to manage that sort of thing here at Rise is just whoever walks through that door, just give them the best service possible. Like give them the
Yeah,
best service possible and just try your best to give them that best service possible. And if we don't ever want to cause any controversy either, like you were saying, like that's not good. It's like a relationship with a mom and a dad. It's not good for the kids. Like
yeah.
if
Well,
if the club and the high
sure.
school are arguing back and forth, it's like, come on, man.
Well,
It's
then I
not good
think
for the
you
kids.
you kind of leave a negative taste in and it doesn't represent you well for
Yeah.
your business or or for pole vault, right? They're going to have a
Right.
negative experience with pole vault and they're going to say pole vault, yeah, my kid did pole vault, is terrible.
Right. Right.
You when you're at
Exactly.
that party, you want the guy to say, "Oh, that's awesome! I had it. My kid tried it. It was super hard." And then they went on to something else. You don't want them to be like, "Oh yeah, you should hear this story." The coach at the club and the da, 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 da. It's like, no, no, and
Yeah.
it just doesn't help.
It would be interesting to talk to somebody. You brought up soccer. It would be interesting to talk to somebody um about that, like in a club. And because
Mhm.
I mean what's happening right now is not new. Like this has already happened in gymnastics, this has already happened in soccer, it's happened in volleyball, like the whole club and high school thing, like it's already happened in other sports. And it would just be interesting to see like how they managed it and things like that. Another thing that I always try to do too is just try to support the high schools whenever possible. It's like, oh man, we don't have this pole. Hey, I got this pole. You need the pole?
Mhm.
Like, go. Let's, you can rent this pole and you can have the pole. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Like, thank you.
Yeah,
Or the coach, some coach emails in and is like, hey, I have this problem with this kid and whatever. And you do your best to try to give them some good advice. And the hard thing is to not always give them the advice of, yeah, bring them in. Yeah, bring them in
mm,
and have them sign up, and we'll take care of them. It is
yeah,
it is difficult. You do have to give away some free advice.
sure,
It's a
sure.
good look. It's a good look, and just to balance out the relationships and make sure that you're looking at the pole vault community as a whole instead of just what's going on in your building. I think that's
Yeah, and
important.
I think sometimes we can get too absorbed in our own self
Hmm.
and we forget to take a step back and get the perspective of the bigger picture and where things fit.
Right. Right.
And I like to try to take that, into really anything I do, right? And I think you kind of touched on something about um, when a kid comes in the gym and you advise your coaches to like try to treat everybody well and give them a good experience. But doesn't that transcend into like going to the grocery store and not being a
Yeah.
jerk and leaving your cart? And you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's just treating people with respect and dignity and in a good way. And I think that's going to take you really far, whether it's in pole vault or something else, right?
You would think that would be common sense, but it's yeah. I always tell our young, athletes here, just because inevitably we end up giving life advice too. We give pole
Sure,
vault
big
advice,
time.
but it always just ends up turning into a lot of times having,
Well, but
life talks. you
even when
know?
you think it's just pole vault advice, it becomes that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. I always tell them
just
though, I was like, these days, it's not that difficult to be successful. You just gotta do what you say you're gonna do and show up on time and answer your emails in a good amount of time. Like if you did those three things, you could probably be pretty successful in any industry.
sure, sure.
It's really wild.
Well, even as a parent, right? Like
Yeah.
90% of being a parent is being there, showing
Yeah.
up.
Right.
You
Right.
show up to your kid's thing, and I went to one of my kids' school events, and it's really hard because it's in the middle of the day, and I have responsibilities and I've got stress and different things that we all manage, as everyone does. But you show up, and the it's it's really interesting. My daughter's in third grade now, and even at that age, and third graders, some of them they expect the parents to be there.
Mm,
And so there's really no reaction of excitement. Sometimes it's over the top excited, but what's for sure is that if the parent isn't there, there's always some level of like subdued disappointment in a certain way.
yeah.
Although, everyone's family dynamic is different and every kid knows this or that.
Right.
But, being there and showing up is so important. And I
Yeah.
think, for us as a business and a pole manufacturer, I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that I would say I'm probably most proud of to be a part of is a company that shows up every day for 35 years, almost,
Yeah.
knocking on the door of 40 years and being consistent and delivering. And it's a grind every day, every day, every day, every day. And I think, that's another sort of lesson from pole vault, right? Who was I watching? I can't remember who it was. It was a pretty famous coach. And they were talking about the number one differentiator between the the most elite and really, really good is the most elite shows up
Mm, yeah.
every time, every practice. And actually, in another way, I'm not like a big football guy or fan or anything. I mean, I don't really follow it at all. But I came across this interview with Tom Brady, and he was talking about his kind of coming up through the Patriots organization and this and that. And he was like third string. So, he was all mad because the top two guys were getting, whatever, 20 looks and then 10 looks, and he got two in practice. And he's like,
Right.
how am I supposed to get any better, coach? Coach is
Right.
like, make the two that you got as good as possible.
Mm,
You do that over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then those two turn to four, and then those four turn to 10, and then those 10 turn to 20. And I think, you're starting in the game. But if you're not showing up consistently, you're not winning what, seven championships? How many do you win? You know,
a lot.
if you don't
Yeah.
show up and you don't reach that level of consistency and doing that grind every single day. I mean, you notice it in your gym, I'm sure, with kids that, oh, I got to go do this, coach. I can't be there. The ones that are there every day,
Yeah.
imagine their level of improvement is much higher than ones that don't show up.
It's very, very simple. Like it really is. Like I know that pole vault is a complex event, but it's just the simple things that go across all these different areas of life, like you're talking about. Like the other day, we had a kid jump 16 from four lefts, and I was like, "That's a really good jump
Big
for
jump.
four
Yeah,
lefts
no
for a high
doubt.
school kid." You know,
No
like
doubt.
that's a good
That was
jump.
my high school PR, man.
Yeah, and I was like, "That's crazy." But then it's like, all right, let's just break this out. I'm not going to mention his name, but let's just break this out. When's the last time I didn't see this dude show up to a workout? Years.
Yeah. The
Okay.
other one that I heard say the same thing was Michael Phelps.
Hmm.
And his comment was, it's not just this year, this year, this year, this year, this year, this year. You get a kid that doesn't, shows up every workout for years.
Yeah. You could be good. You can be really, really, really good. And you can start. If you would have told me that this kid, I love him to death. He's great, great kid. But if you would have told me when I saw him when he was younger, like, hey, yeah, this dude's gonna jump 16 from four lefts at a workout, I'd be like, you have got to be kidding me. There's
He'd
no
be
way.
like, he'd be
But
lucky to
that
jump 16 at all.
yeah, it's so wild though. Like you just see, but they just continue to show up, and they have that work ethic. And guess what? They have really bad days in the middle. You know, there are
Mhm.
some times where they show up, and it's like I can tell they do not want to be there. They don't want to be there. They're having a bad workout. They had a bad day at school or whatever, but they still show up and they still get the job done. Maybe it's not as good as normal, but it just starts to compile. It's just that compounding interest in the pole vault, and then all
Mhm.
of a sudden you end up in a really good spot.
Well, but
Um,
even those bad days are the days that you learn the most,
oh
usually.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
those are the ones that most people just, yeah. So you can learn from those days, but then also those are the ones that knock people out. You know what I'm saying? Like those are the ones that kick them out. And most people, I always tell our athletes that like you go through, ups and downs, just like the stock market. It goes up and down and all around. And most people um they sell. They sell, too early. They
Mm,
can't deal with the ups and downs. They love the ups, but the downs they can't deal with a large number of downs. So it's like
mm,
you go up in the beginning of your pole vaulting career and it's great and you have fun and you're PRing a bunch, and then eventually you're going to go down and you're going to have kind of a slump, or maybe not a slump, but you're not going to be making that rapid improvement. But if you can make it on the other side of that, then you get another opportunity to go up. And
mm,
then after a while, you're going to have another slump. And if you can make it on the other side of that, then you get to continue to go up. A lot of people can't get through those slump times. And then
sure.
those slump times just knock them out. And then they never got to see their ultimate potential because they weren't able to just continue to show up during the hard times. It's so easy to
Mm.
show up during the good times. Having a good workout is so easy. It's so easy. Like
I don't know if it's that easy.
if you have a good workout, it's easy to be happy and
Oh
show up
yeah.
and like it's no problem. But having a bad workout and being able to keep your composure and being able to just stay, focused on like it's going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. That's really hard to do, especially as a
Oh,
young
no
person,
doubt.
you
No
know?
doubt. Yeah, I mean that's kind of in some ways like you'd hope that that's a lesson that they can take away, even if they drop out, even if they say, you know what, pole vault's too much for me. Maybe that's a lesson that those kids can still carry through the
Oh yeah.
next endeavor, right? Like, you know what, this was really, really hard what I'm doing right now, but it wasn't as hard as what I did back then,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so I'm going to just keep going. I'm going to keep doing it. But, I don't know. There's a certain quality to that as well, right? Is
Mhm.
showing up and being able to uh, move on to the next element, the next step. There's another like coaching greatness thing that I came across was this study they did with tennis players. And sorry if my camera's a little weird right now.
Yeah,
I got this. Yeah, let me see if I can move this. I got
maybe
this.
just move it a little
The
closer or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the sun comes through these windows in my front of the office and it just blasts me. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I came across this like coaching thing, and it was a study that they did with tennis players. They're saying one of the things that the top tennis players could do that some of the not as good on the tour was that their ability to recover from negative thought faster,
Mm,
right? So they make a bad shot, and then rather than coming in at the next shot and thinking about this bad shot they just had, they're able to put that behind them and move to the next. There's a saying my dad uses a lot, and I think it's really true. And you can see it on the field sometimes when an athlete takes a jump and he'll say, "Well, the next jump has nothing to do with the last jump you just took.
hmm.
It's a
That's
totally new
exactly
jump."
it.
If you can refocus your energy, and let's say I don't know, you totally bombed it and got stood up or something. You took off, you reached at takeoff. Let's say you just got too anxious and you take this big long step and pole doesn't move. You have a choice to make. You go down poles. Do you stay on the same pole? Do you move your run? What do you do? Obviously, it's going to depend on the kid or the athlete. But if you reset your mind and recognize that that jump that I just took is done, it's over,
Hmm.
has nothing to do with the jump that I'm about to take. If I can refocus my energy and effort on this next jump, or in this case, the tennis study, my next shot, I have a better chance of making the bar.
Yeah, and how strong, I mean, if a kid can, or an athlete can figure that out and learn how to do that, that's invaluable right there.
Well, in a way, that's the same. It's the same that happens in a workout, right? You have a bad workout, the whole workout is bad. Well, can we move past that and the next one we come in with a good one? In
Yeah,
this
can
case,
you
it's
leave
a
it
little
at the
bit
door?
tighter.
Just
Mm-hmm.
leave.
Yeah,
I always tell our athletes, just leave this one here. Just leave
yeah.
this one here. And once you walk out, leave it here. Don't bring it out that door with you. Go
In
home,
college,
just
my
hang
college
out.
coach used to always say, before you walk through the gate, take a moment and leave behind whatever you're dealing with so
Mhm.
that we can come and start a fresh practice and have a good positive energy coming into the practice. Right. And sometimes
Absolutely.
you had to, right? You have finals, you girlfriend just broke up with you, boyfriend just broke up with you, whatever. You have to figure out how to go on and move on. But
Right.
that's life, man. Sun
100%.
comes up. Sun comes up.
Speaking of life, I'm interested in I love like since I've started this business and these other things that I'm doing, I've been fascinated with business and just like fascinated with like different types of businesses and things like that and how people get through like the challenging times. So, if you were to pick like one or two of the most challenging things of manufacturing a pole vaulting pole specifically, what would
Hmm.
you say are like like the most challenging parts
Of actually producing a pole
of
or running the
producing
business.
of well, aren't they the same? Like, so whenever you would know better than me. So I was thinking to myself, like, in my head, I mulled this over and I was like, for me, I would be the most concerned about my supply of material dropping out.
Hmm.
That would, for me, that would, if I was running a pole manufacturing business, that would scare me at night. Like
Hmm.
I would lay in bed and be like, man, I hope nothing happens to our supplier. So like
Okay.
some stuff like that, or like getting the concoction right and or like dealing with like I don't even know like how many poles that come out of the oven do you have to just discard and like just like random stuff like that. I'm just interested in that stuff.
So this is a really good question. Um, I'm going to sit with it for a minute
Uh-huh.
because there's a lot of different ways and directions to go, I suppose. Like,
So I would say I think a lot of it probably carries over too. So like dealing, staffing is probably hard and dealing with schedules and like this person's going on vacation, this person is sick or like staffing and stuff like that. So let's just take that out and like let's take out the administrative tasks like making payroll and all of those things. Let's just do just I guess like yeah, producing a pole vaulting pole and like what are the things that make you nervous and how do you manage them?
fortunately and unfortunately, um, like you use the example of the material side of it, we've been able to sustain the business for a very long time. And the reason I mention that is because a lot of the things that could go wrong have gone wrong. So
Interesting.
there was times when just COVID is an easy example because it just happened not that long ago, and that was a very difficult time for all businesses, not just pole vaulting. Um,
And why
so
was that? Was it the supply chain issues?
yeah, and it wasn't just, it's the entire supply chain, right? I mean, the whole world was in this kind of turmoil, really. Um, so that, those kinds of things have occurred, and then we have the benefit of having gone through them and been able to come out the other side. And I feel like um, we're actually in a really, really strong position, maybe stronger than ever, even after, all of that and being able to recover from that. But I think as far as like difficulty, I would say discipline. I think,
Mm.
and the reason I say that is because it covers a lot of areas. Um, Discipline in that staying focused on what we're good at and staying not getting distracted by other things. Um, as an example, it might be. advantageous to produce a different type of pole, different design. I mean, so another thing that we battled and challenged against is, one of our competitors producing multiple different lines of poles for this reason, for that reason, this, da, 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 da. We never did that. We stayed with the pole design that we feel is the highest performing vaulting pole on the planet. And we've stuck with that. And our sort of, I guess, motto and mission is that we want to produce the highest performing vaulting pole, period. And so in we look at that in terms of consistency, durability, and performance.
Mm-hmm.
So staying focused on that mission, we could say, okay, well, we can use maybe cheaper material and produce a pole at a lower cost that's going to be inferior, and it's not going to be as good of a product, but it's cheaper, let's say, something like that. That's something we could do. We could get caught in the trap of, the carbon side of it. Um, so there's the quality control issue. Um, you know, we will discard poles for cosmetic blemishes. Um, but we maintain a level of quality control that we could say, maybe one day we say, well, you know what? It doesn't look that bad. Let's go ahead and sell it, but it doesn't really meet our standards. That would be a lack of discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've heard rumors about other companies where they say, it's an 11.6, but really it's more like an 11.5, or it could be 11.7, or whatever the number, right? That's discipline. And actually, another sort of proudish moment was I remember talking to Brad. Actually, we were making poles for Katie when her poles got broken and she was kind of figuring
Yeah.
out what she was going to do. And that's a whole nother wild story. But he's like, he called me on Wednesday. She was leaving for Doha on Saturday. And so we figured we needed to get the poles to Atlanta by Friday. So it was Wednesday night. It was like 5 o'clock or so. So it means I have Thursday to make the poles. And but one of the things that he said to me was, I'm like, Brad, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this. I mean, I'll start at the lower end, or where you think the most important poles will be, and we'll build the series. And if I only get 3 poles, like, are you okay with that? Whatever. And he's like, yeah, I mean, most important thing to me is that they're in a good series, that she can, move through a couple of poles and jump on them and have some poles to jump in this meet. And he goes, one of the things that I've always, like, when I was an athlete, I would get kind of pissed at it, because sometimes it might take a day or two longer than I expected for a pole. But you guys are always good at, if I needed an 11.5, it was an 11.5.
Right.
And if you got an 11.6, you aren't going to send it and call it an 11.5. And so he's
Yeah.
like, sometimes I get pissed because I'm like, well, I mean, like, it's close enough or whatever. But it comes down to discipline, and we're not willing to compromise the quality of the product for urgency. Even, that's something that is, it's not difficult, but it's easy. It would be easy to fall into the trap of, trying to play this game.
I think it would be incredibly difficult to do that. Like
Well,
over a long period of time to stay that disciplined, especially when you can see like in like the late 90s, early 2000s when carbon poles start coming out and it's like people are having success on these, like that must have been incredibly difficult. Like, I know you were working at the factory then, but like for them to like kind of make that decision, like, yeah, we're just gonna stay the course. Like we're just gonna stay the course here.
yes and no. And I say that because it comes down to that kind of maybe core value, level of values of what we want to do. And I think part of the misnomer for us is that we don't do any R&D, or that we don't, like, it's not like we didn't consider it. It's not like we didn't make those polls. It's not like we didn't try them out, see. But if we're trying to make the best product we possibly can, that's what we're aiming for.
Mm.
And and when we see the mechanics of how a carbon pole bends, or this design or that design, or we come up with this idea and we go through the testing period and we say, well, does this stand up to what we're already doing? And if the answer is not yes, then we don't pursue it, right? And so yet we haven't reached that uh, answer. So
Right.
like we can, so there's that. And then I think too, it kind of comes back to that, the origin story of, well, if you only have three poles or two poles, then you're going to get your third pole. And, especially if, we're spending money on it, they're expensive, poles aren't cheap. And you finally get that pole and it's not what you expect,
Mm.
we failed you,
Yeah.
right? So we take that into consideration too. Like, you open up this package, you get all excited, and then you open up and you're just this big disappointment. Like, well, that's not going to help.
Yeah. Right.
But on the performance side of it, the feeling of the jump, the feeling of the pole, that would be another um, part of the discipline where, you can tug on different strings to get different results, so to speak. Like we can make a pole stiffer in certain ways, or other, this way or that way. Depending on what we do is going to affect how the pole feels when the athlete jumps on it. Knowing those things, we have to have the discipline to say, well, let's just, I don't know, like an example of, say, this top athlete wants a pole on a different diameter.
Hmm.
If we can do that to a certain extent, but if we reach outside of the sort of formula, the comfort zone, and we have to tug on this string a little too hard, well, now we're building a pole that's not the same. So it might be,
Yeah.
a 22.2, but the way we arrived at 20.2 matters. Does
Right.
that make sense? So having the discipline to say, you know what, we could do that, but it's not going to fit with your series. It's not going to be this, it's not going to fit the spirit model, the pole design that we're trying to achieve. It's not going to feel like the spirit pole should. So you're going to go from your, let's just pick a number, say 18.0, and you're going to go to a 17.2.
Right.
Well, that 17.2, if it's not within the parameters, it's going to feel like a totally different pole,
Right.
right? So,
Yeah,
so
because it's built a little differently. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
that actually brings
So
up a good point. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
hold that
Yeah.
thought. So having the discipline to be able to articulate that we want to keep this in the parameters where the pole is going to feel and jump the same that it should, the way you expect it to, we might not be able to change diameter that much or do this or that.
Right.
So
That
having the
makes sense.
discipline to be able to do that and stay kind of within that parameter that says, okay, we build it this way. We know that that's going to create the nice even round bend. It's going to feel smooth from pole to pole to pole, which is part of the importance of having a
Yeah,
pole series at all. Um,
absolutely.
so being able to kind of navigate and manage those things without getting distracted, or chasing after something that doesn't match our core beliefs and value of what we see the pole to be.
I know exactly what you mean. It's actually the same concept you were talking about with Tom Brady. It's like, all right, I'm gonna do these two snaps really, really well, or to these two looks really, really well. Like I'm gonna be disciplined on a lower number of things, but the things that we do are going to be of very high quality and they're going to be, the best we can possibly do them. Instead of it would get but it would be it is I could see how it could be appealing and kind of like just like if you look around and it's like, oh, well, I want to do that and I want to do this and I want to do this. And then all of a sudden you're wrapped up in 15 different projects and you're like, man, I'm in 15 different projects and not any of them are good. You know, like I'd rather have one really, really good thing, that's consistent over a long period of time. Hey, do you care if we take a bathroom break really quick and then I have a
I don't
couple
know.
couple questions for you?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah.
cool. All right,
Absolutely.
be back here in like a minute or two.
Perfect.
Okay. What up?
Ooh, I got a little snack too.
Nice. Very good. Hey, and let me know if you're running low on time or anything. Just interrupt me and just you know, let me know.
Okay. No, I think we're good. I
Okay.
got a couple things happening, but no big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing
I
urgent.
uh I have a interesting one for you. So we have thought about, you know, in our rental fleet of poles, we've thought about, sorry, doing
Got
a,
smoke getting to you.
yeah, I know, right? Seriously. We've thought about doing a universal flex, like a rise flex. I know other people have done this, but in theory, it it makes sense to me. Like, okay, if all the pole manufacturers have different, ways that they flex the poles, if we just as a club, if we just flex all of our poles the same, then it should provide a clean transition from one pole to the next. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought of two things that could make that invalid. And I'm curious your take on it. So, number one is material. So, if the material is different, maybe it reacts differently, and then it's not as such of a clean transition, if it's all on the same flex system as what I might think.
Mm,
And then also the sail piece,
mm.
where that's located, and the manufacturers have them in different locations, and that also could affect a universal flex system as well. So I guess my question is why can there be a universal flex system? Why is there not a universal flex system? And why it would or would not work, in your opinion? I know flex is
So
a touchy subject between the manufacturers a little bit, maybe.
uh, I don't think so. I don't
All
think
right.
so. I think the thing the I don't want to say misunderstanding of flex maybe. Um, but I think a lot of where people go wrong with flex is that uh we think that it's going to tell the whole story and it doesn't.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is the flex number is a measurement of the pole's flexibility.
mhm,
It's a static test that tells us when this amount of weight is applied to this part of the pole, it depresses this far, and that's our flex number.
mhm,
Um, you know, if we kind of consider where it came from as a manufacturer, we had to be able to say, okay, these poles are different than the rigid poles of the years past, right? They're flexible. So how do we measure how flexible they are? And we came up with this. I didn't come up with it, but our system is comes from the original system. Um, and then over the years, it's been refined because of the different lengths of poles that we've made, and we had to look at 5 pound increments, 10 pound increments, et cetera, which is a different side of the flex conversation.
yeah,
But
yeah.
ultimately, it's how stiff is this pole? What it doesn't tell you is how the pole's going to feel when you jump on it. And
Mhm,
that's going to change depending on the design of the pole, the sail piece, the material, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from a consumer's perspective, um, the sad part is, I alluded to it before, is that I think that some of the other manufacturers could have some variability in their flex numbers.
mhm,
And for that reason, people felt like I went to this poll, I expected X, but that's not what it felt like. Am I crazy or is it the poll? And they started checking it themselves.
mm.
And so that's, I think, where some of the sensitivity of the flex conversation comes into play. But the crux of it is, and to answer your question, you would be able to gauge, a comparison of stiffness only by having your own sort of flex system, right? So on your system, it would be XYZ, and that means this pole is such and such stiffer than that pole.
Mhm.
But that's all it's going to tell you. It's not going to tell you how the pole is going to feel or react. And sometimes you could be in a situation where two poles are the exact same flex number, designed and built totally different, and the kid takes fairly similar jumps. I mean, high school kids are, the variability in their jump can change a lot, where they could jump on the same
Yeah.
pole, same grip, two wildly different outcomes. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they take exactly the same jump on these two different design poles and have two different results because of the way the pole is structured and designed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that
So
makes
so
total sense.
so you're only addressing part of the situation. And so as a coach, I think the feedback that you could gain from that would be to say these poles are going to be similar, but you can't really say that they're exactly the same. And I think that's the misunderstanding that people have about the flex system in general.
So
Like
yeah.
I could take a Pacer carbon and flex it on our system and get the whatever flex, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same as that flex spirit pole, because it's a totally different pole. But it
you
gives us a,
use, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it could give you it, it could give you a starting point maybe to say, transitionally, maybe we can expect this to feel this way or that way.
But you couldn't, you know, you couldn't do a universal flex system that would be, well, yeah, you could. You could. Yeah, you obviously could, but I think one word that you used that I think is very important word is it's a static test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our event is not static.
No,
It's far from
it's
that.
not.
It's
And
dynamic.
really, it's really just a gauge. I had this conversation with a guy that was designing. He was designing some gymnastics equipment, but also some like strength equipment. But it
Mhm.
was body weight strength. So he designed this thing where it was like a bench press, and you push the levers, but your body would tilt, and then you would turn the dial, and depending on the weight, it would change how much of your body was being lifted. So you're lifting your body weight, but you could adjust it.
Interesting.
It was really cool. Um, but at any rate, one of the things we were talking about was, I'm like, well, how do you know how much someone's lifting? And
Right.
he's like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, well, of course it matters. And he's like, no, it doesn't matter. And then I started to think about it kind of in terms of poles a little bit too. But he's like, all you need to know is, if yesterday you were on one and you want to go more, tomorrow you turn it to two,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. And then you can gauge your progress, and eventually you have a benchmark. That's
Yeah.
that's pole stiffness. That's flex numbers, right? Like
Right.
the context, we have context over 40 years of pole vaulters that a 520 11.7, which is what Mondo broke the world record on, is a very stiff pole. It's a long, stiff pole that not very many people in the world can use, right?
Hmm.
But 14 foot, 25.2, a lot of high school boys can use that pole. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean anything to anybody outside of pole vaulting.
Right.
But the context of a 14 150 certainly does.
So is that, well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I, that, so yeah, so that makes sense. The weight label thing is really pretty annoying. Just being honest, like it's just annoying because it almost seems like it's almost kind of uh I don't want to offend anybody, but like kind of like almost like a made up number almost sometimes, to where, because it's like a 140, you said a 14,150 or whatever you said, 14,150 of this company, like is not a 14,150 of this company, is not a 14,150 of this company. And
Mm.
that just creates so much confusion. And again, I don't want to be like controversial about it, but at the end of the day, like there's that thing was put in place as, I think, as like a safety measure. And sometimes I feel like it does the opposite, like because they're not, they're so different, you know?
So, yeah, my reaction to that would be that it used to not always be like that. Like,
Mm.
for example, so we're similar age.
Yeah.
So when did you graduate, like high school or college?
2006, I graduated high school.
Oh, okay. So I'm a little bit older than you are. Um,
What are you?
but
Now you got to tell
two
me.
thou- I, 2000,
Okay, gotcha, gotcha.
but not by much.
No, no, no.
But at any rate, so back in the times when we were jumping, there was really two major brands,
Hmm.
maybe three. And then since then, it's gotten, there's more and more brands, and everyone has chopped up their own flex chart and weight rating system differently.
Right.
But at that time, pretty much all of the Pacer Guild poles were and Spirit poles were pretty comparable. Like the big difference I would say was probably like they picked up Sky pole, and
Hmm.
that was about a 5 pound difference, but it wasn't, I mean it close. And then they changed and did like the best flex system and all that stuff. So, but at that time, up until probably the mid to late 2000s, all of those poles weight ratings were very similar. You could go from a, you know, name your flavor to another one, and if you're in a 14150, it would be pretty similar.
And that was developed off of, I'm assuming, like a similar, like some sort of algorithm, like if it's this length and this flex, it's this weight.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
basically. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that that was an effort to put flexibility into context, right?
Right.
Because to use
Which
kind of the
makes a lot of
same,
sense. It does make a
yeah,
lot of sense. Yeah.
right. So,
It-
as a manufacturer, you have to measure okay, the stiffness of the pole, and then what does that mean? So
right.
really, the weight rating, it means that an athlete weighing, 150 pounds or less ought to be able to use this pole, okay. I think part of the maybe the challenge in it is that the safety component, I
Were you guys required to do that? I'm just curious. Like, and you don't feel free to just tell me don't want to share with that. Like how did that weight rating come up? Because I think
mm,
back to like the Browning poles like that had
mhm,
like where you raise your grip up
mhm,
and it's a different weight at each
mhm.
one. When did it become I honestly don't know much about it. So like when did it become like I guess regulated, like where it's like you have to have this?
Well, it's gone through a few um, changes, I guess. Like uh, we always had a rating, always, and then
A
it
weight rating?
became, yeah,
Okay. All right.
yeah, yeah. And I think pretty much from the very, very beginning. I mean, maybe in the very beginning days in the early, 50s, they didn't, but at some point, and so polls were rated, and then it became okay, the poll has to have a label that says what the weight rating is, so on and so forth and so forth. In like, I want to say 2002, basically what happened is there was, I think, two kids had
Yeah.
some really bad accidents. They went out of the back of the pit on too small of poles.
Yep.
And that's when the NFHS implemented the pit size rule,
Mm.
of what it is now, the minimum size, like 16 feet by, you know, um, that rule, and then the weight rating rule. Those two went into effect like around the same time.
The
And
weight
then,
rating as it has to be on there. It has to be a label
yes,
on there.
it
Okay,
has to be a
gotcha.
label on there, and it has to be enforceable that, kids don't jump on poles rated above their body weight.
Yep.
And I think really part of the biggest problem with it is the enforcement, I
Mm,
think, in how people perceive that it should be enforced. That's a whole another conversation probably.
right.
Um, but yeah, it was early 2000s, and then it became, well, now the weight label has to also serve as the maximum hand grip, and so on and so forth. Um, where it stemmed from really was those accidents in the early 2000s.
Right.
I think from a manufacturing perspective, the the weight rating in effect is an effort to reduce over gripping.
The weight rating to reduce over gripping. Okay. Can you break that out?
So what I mean by that is athletes gripping too high on too soft of a pole.
Right.
So if, for example, you have a kid that weighs 160 pounds, maybe they're super fast, um, and they want to grab a 16-foot 140.
Ooh.
And the idea is, this actually, I heard a kid say this one time at a meet. He goes, well, if I grip higher, the pole's going to bend more, I'll get in easier.
Oh,
And
we
so
hear that all the
that's
time too. Yeah.
exactly. So it's that's a misnomer that's out there that people still believe. And so if you do that, you have a really high risk of overloading the pole, or maybe not even overloading the pole because poles can bend a really long way,
Oh yeah. I've
but it
seen it.
does happen. Yeah. And it happens where they get overloaded and they just can't keep bending. They can't bend forever. I mean, we could
Mhm.
make poles that do. Actually, Toby tells a funny story about the gas lines. They use these like solid fiberglass rods that they like drill into the ground.
Yeah.
And he had some, and he would, I think he jumped off the roof, and then the pole would be on the ground, and he'd jump off the roof and he'd hold on to it and he'd go down to the ground, and then it would come up really, really, really slow, and it would barely be enough to lift him. And then he could like come back up onto the roof, but they
That
wouldn't
dude's
break
a nut. That
because
dude's crazy. Did
they're
you listen to
so
his podcast?
I did. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Yeah,
I
he didn't say that, but that's crazy.
he's super interesting. I love talking to Toby. He's one of my like favorite pole vault people to just like talk about stuff. Just
That
because
was one
he's
of the most fascinating podcasts that I had ever done, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
When he's super smart too. And that's where and then I also think he certainly thinks differently than I do.
Hmm.
And so I'm like I just like talking to him. It's a good dude to talk to. But
So,
anyway,
yeah, back to it. Sorry.
um I think it's an effort so that we can avoid that problem from happening. And
Now, did you
not just
guys
the
move yours lower because of that reason too?
no, we've always had the sort of um, the optimal grip range being 6 inches to 18 inches from the top of the pole.
Gotcha.
We've kind of always sort of said that. That's always kind of been the sort of design of the pole. Certainly, we see people gripping higher than that, and especially at the elite level.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, not at the very most elite level. I mean, if you watch Mondo jumping, he's probably gripping 505, 508 max.
Hmm.
I'd be surprised if he grips much higher than I don't think I've ever seen him grip higher than 510. I don't know. I
Yeah.
we maybe we'd have to ask him next time we talk to him, but um,
Right.
we just think that the pole works better that way. Um, I think
I
what
mean, I
can
would agree. I think like just from, I mean, we've worked with thousands of pole vaulters, and I get a low grade anxiety whenever I watch a kid run down the runway gripping at the top of a pole. Maybe
yeah,
a mid
same,
grade anxiety.
same.
It's
Well, I
it's
think
freaky.
yeah, um, yeah, but I think that's the big thing is the over gripping on soft poles because even if the pole doesn't break, the most common accident in pole vaulting now happens when the pole doesn't reach the vertical.
Yes.
And that is always a function of grip. It's not a function of stiffness.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
when you raise your grip, it's a longer lever and you have to move that lever to the vertical to land safely in the pit.
Right. Yeah. The weight label situation, like I said, it's so hard, and I do understand the the reason behind it and everything. It's just like we said earlier though, like how it's it's such a dynamic sport, and like there's so many variables that it's just so difficult because a kid who weighs 150 and jumps up at takeoff could weigh, with the help of his jump at takeoff, could weigh a lot less than 150, of amount of pressure that's being put into the pole. But
Mhm.
then the opposite of that, a kid who weighs 150 and then runs down the runway and just sinks on it, you're adding that force of not jumping up with like from the run, and then all of a sudden that kid doesn't weigh 150. The pole doesn't think that that person weighs 150 anymore. he weighs more than that because
Mm.
he did not jump up, you know? So it's just so difficult.
So this is it. We put up a swing in our yard for my kids,
Hmm.
and it's one of those ones that has it's almost like a trampoline bottom.
Oh yeah, we got one of those too.
Yeah. So, they stand on it
Hmm.
and they jump on it. And I'm trying to explain to them that when they jump and land on that swing, it's different than if they're just swinging on it.
Hmm.
And that's the same thing. If you want to break a rope that's tied to something, you're going to yank on it. You're not going to do a steady pull on it.
Right.
That's the equivalent of the steady pull is the kid that jumps off takeoff and rolls the pole into the pit and it's fine. The
Right.
yank is when someone jumps down and puts so much pressure on the pole that the pressure can't handle it.
Right.
And I think that's where the weight I, I don't love the weight rule because
Hmm.
I think that there are scenarios and situations where kids can jump, and I probably shouldn't say this as a manufacturer, but there are certain situations under the proper guidance that it can be done safely and okay, and it's fine. It happens, I'm
Everybody
sure.
knows that. Everybody knows that. And that's what bothers me about it is that like in your position, it's like you have to kind of put that disclaimer out there like I probably shouldn't
Yeah.
say this and it's like everybody
Well,
knows that, you know?
the frustrating part is that it's been boiled down to this one variable.
Hmm.
And if there was a way that the impossible thing is to say, well, okay, can you say this kid can jump on a 10-pound lighter pole if they're running such and such speed,
Hmm.
or if they're jumping at this angle at takeoff? Well, okay, we all know those are factors that play into it, but how do you measure that? How do you enforce that? So it's a tricky balance, and I understand sort of why the NFHS has the rule in place. Um, and I think, from a product liability perspective, there has to be a limit. You can't just
Yeah,
say, oh yeah, sure, 200-pound kid on a 130, no problem. Like, of
exactly.
course not. But it
Yeah.
it the weight rating, the origins are to put it into context for use.
And that makes a
So,
lot of sense to me. And I didn't realize that. That makes a lot of sense.
and then the
'Cause
rule is
yeah.
derived from the fact that there's a label on the pole that says XYZ.
Right. And then the unfortunate part is that the coaches, we have to explain to the athletes and to other coaches and parents or whatever, like, there's a lot of gray area here, like it's a 150 if you hold here, but if you hold way down here, like the stiffness is a lot different, and explaining that to them. And like you said,
Well,
with the proper guidance, you know, it's just so hard. I wonder if there'll ever be a day. Do you ever see a day where that is revamped and like
I,
standardized and somebody kind of solves that puzzle?
I think it would be really, really difficult.
Yeah,
Really difficult.
it's so hard.
Not saying it can't happen. I mean, we've seen much more challenging problems be solved in other places. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with how it goes about being, looked at and changed and things. So I don't know. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Well, it's so you made the comment earlier. Like it's not something I think about. Um, I think overall, like big picture, I think it does help in a lot of ways. Um, I do think that there are some areas where it hurts, and I think that you hear these stories about kids' weights being written on their hands and all this kind of nonsense, and it's like what are we doing here, guys? Like, use some
Uh,
common sense, like. The other thing that I don't understand is most states, the way the rules are typically enforced comes down to like the coach liability
mm,
and saying, my kid's not going to, we sign this waiver or whatever, and they attest to the kid's weight and the poles that they're using. Um, and so I think that's fairly good because I think that, well, that's also tricky because one wants to think that the relationship between coach and athlete is always a positive one, but we know that's not true. So that's
I've heard,
how
I
do you,
mean, I've heard, I'm sure
I don't
you've heard
know.
it too. Like it's almost like wrestling weight cuts at
Yeah,
our
it's
state meet.
crazy.
At
It's
our state meet,
crazy.
it's like that. Yeah.
And the thing that's what is really, really sad to me is it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Mm,
And I had a different upbringing. I know that, but I never once thought about my weight in the pole ever, my
no.
entire career. And when I jumped 8 feet as a freshman, 11 or 12 feet as a sophomore, I think around 15 as a junior, and like 16 as a senior, something like that.
Hmm.
But I say that because in the beginning, I I stiff pulled my freshman and sophomore year.
Right.
And, technically speaking, it wasn't this way for me, but I think people would assume that it was, that I had like full access to every pole in the arsenal of UCS Spirit, but it wasn't like that.
Right.
Um, we used the poles that the school had, and then if I needed a pole, I had to work for it. Like that was how it was. And so it was like, okay. And I was fortunate enough that the school had quite a bit of poles, and then some of the other schools around the area had poles that I borrowed and stuff like that. But um, that was my pathway, was that I never vaulted my entire career all the way through college. I never vaulted on a pole rated below my body weight at all.
Right.
Short run, long
I
run,
never did
never.
either. I never did
And I
either.
and I think that, and the reason I mention that and bring that up is because I think that pole vaulters can have very successful careers in that model. I think sometimes it happens where that's not feasible.
Hmm.
Uh, and so there has to be sort of some uh, room for negotiation, or room to accommodate exceptions. How that can be done, that's kind of something that I don't think too
Yeah,
much
because
about.
you can get into the opposite side of the spectrum too, like where it's like, okay, yeah, you should not be jumping on a pole that's below your body weight because it could be unsafe. You could fly over the pit and it could be really bad. And we've seen that, and it's so incredibly sad when that happens. But there's also the other end of the spectrum where it's like, okay, this kid's a good pole vaulter. If I put him on a pole at their body weight, they're gonna dump right in the box. Like
Mm,
so there's like that end of the spectrum too, where it's like, oh man, there's I don't know, it's very weird. We had a kid a couple years ago that jumped really, really high, 16 plus on a pole at his body weight, which is kind of rare
mm,
that
totally.
happens. Yeah. But he did just the way that he put pressure into the pole and it just ended up that way. He was a big body too. Dude was jacked beyond
So I
belief.
wanted to ask you, what are the scenarios that you see most often where you're flirting with this body weight line?
That's a good question. Little tiny light, eighth grade girl that is just like she's really athletic, just came from gymnastics and is an incredible athlete and she just isn't really strong enough to maybe move a 120 or something like that. And it's like, but that 115 or that 110 is just, she could qualify for state. So it's just
So
really hard.
I think I see this scenario happen. It's the same scenario, but it manifests differently between boys and girls, I think,
Mhm.
where it's a really athletic kid who doesn't quite have the pole vault kinesthetics that match their athletic ability. So for
Right.
girls, it's typically a girl that's fairly small, maybe came from gymnastics, usually pretty quick, and usually very, very skilled in after leaving the ground. The swing is really good. They're very coordinated, but they're still figuring out the pole vault.
Right.
For the boys, it's usually those kids that are like maybe a football kid that's really athletic, jacked. Maybe they're really maybe tall, pretty fast, and really for them, they can't quite handle. It's like they can't quite handle the grip in a way,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like it's a 185-pound kid, and he's just a stud, but he doesn't know how to pole vault, so you can't put him on a 14,200. Like that's just not going to work, right? Like so then
Right.
you get like a 12,200 or something, and it's the mechanics of that are
Seriously.
weird, right? So
Yeah.
so those are really the scenarios. And once they start to develop their pole vault skill, which takes a long time, years usually, then they may never reach the point in their career where they've developed the pole vault skill that allows them to jump on a pole above their body weight because their athletic ability outweighs their pole vault
That's exactly
language.
it. Yes. Yes. That's exactly it. Maybe there's just not maybe they came to you as a senior and
Yeah,
there's just
sure.
not enough time to really put together the perfect pole vaulting chops to get
Mhm.
them to see their potential. And it's
Yeah.
a tough situation, but I don't know. I don't know. Somebody would have to work on it like kind of exclusively to figure out, a problem or a group of people, and it would be a
I,
tough thing.
I think the hardest, really the biggest challenge would be like I couldn't tell another manufacturer that their pole is a 150, and
Mm,
another manufacturer couldn't tell me my pole is a 150. You know what I'm saying? Or
right.
we have it as a 140, and they're going to say it's a 150 or something. Like there becomes a new dynamic in that situation. And again, the from the I don't want to get litigious about it, but the product liability component of it, where you have uh, someone saying that no, this is a. I think about this from time to time, like Mount Everest. Like they use ladders to cross crevasses
Right.
as a bridge. Well, if that ladder breaks, are they going to come to Warner Ladders and say your ladder broke on Mount Everest? Like you're liable for
Right.
this person's demise. Course they're going to say no, you're not using the product the way that it was intended to be used. So
Right.
that I think is the biggest rub in trying to create and establish this sort of standardization. Now, in the same vein, what I could say is that the two manufacturers that have been doing this the longest are very comparable in their weight rating systems.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to use a standard, we could base it off of that system and say this is the most known, this is the most used, and in a lot of ways has been the most successful.
Yeah, and the hard thing is it is advantageous. It's maybe not right, but it is advantageous to have a lower weight rating because more people will be able to use those poles like at the state meet, like where it's like, oh man, this brand of pole, like I need I can't jump on the 140, but this one I can.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
and then it's like, oh man, well, I have to use that one because that's the one that I'm going to be able to make weight at the state meet or whatever. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. Lots of stuff. All right, really quick. Has the sauce stayed the same since back in the day with
Sauce stayed the same.
yeah, with just the way you make polls? Because that's the biggest thing when I think of UCS Spirit, I just think of consistency.
Yeah,
Has it stayed relatively the same, or are there things that you guys have kind of switched up over the years?
that's a really good question. Um, of course, over time things evolve.
Hmm.
So we're not necessarily. using exactly the same, things evolve. So there's been advancements in materials, there's been advancements in different methods of production, things like that. But I would say they're pretty nuanced in a certain way. Um, and and what we really focus in on is making sure that if there is any kind of a change, that it just is an easy example. We moved to the factory, like I said,
Mhm.
30 years in the same place, and then we moved here in 2017. So that's in effect change too. But having the discipline and the control and to ensure that when we're producing a pole, whether it was made in 1990 or 2000 or 2020 or 2023, those all mean the same. So when
Mm.
someone's going from pole to pole to pole, maybe we used a different wrapping table, or we had to use a different vendor or something. Um, that what we're producing meets and satisfies the parameters of what we're trying to produce, and fits with what we've done over the years.
Right.
So one kind of case in point is when Mondo jumped at the summit 2000, I don't know what year it was. He was a senior in high school. He is jumping 582, and they don't. I know it's crazy.
So nuts, man.
I I wish they talked more about it in Born to Fly, because they kind of just go past it. But the bar goes to 582, and he doesn't have the next stick.
Hmm.
So he borrows a pole, and he borrowed it from Cole Walsh. Cole trains with Nick Heisong.
Hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was Nick Heisong's pole that Mondo jumped 582 on, which, I mean, he's a 19, 18-year-old kid. It's ridiculous, but
That's
never jumped
crazy.
on the pole before in his life. And it was built like the year he was born.
That's impressive.
So to me, that just tells the testament of, whatever, if there is a change here or there, or whatever, we're able to make sure and ensure that we're building poles that fit in the series over time. So in a situation like that, and this is to me the pole vaulter quintessential pole vault moment, is you're on the back of the runway, you're going for a personal record or state championship, regional thing, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to jump on a pole that you've never used before. It's just
Yeah.
the nature of how it progresses. That you have to be able to believe that and trust that that is going to be exactly how you expect it to be.
Hmm.
That's what we have to deliver. Whether we had to change some tooling, or we had to find a new vendor, or this or that, it's our job to make sure that that's going to be money on the moment.
That's insane. Yeah, that is pretty wild. Actually, I'm curious, what's the biggest pole you guys have ever made?
This is a great question, because biggest length and stiffness.
Let's go length. I think that's the most yeah.
I think 535. We might have made some 540s, but I
Hmm.
don't think they were ever like used. I actually personally I took a 535 pole, I think two of them, to Viktor Shishtiakov way back in the day.
Yeah, I don't remember the name. That's
He was
insane.
a Russian immigrant to Australia at the same time as Markov,
Okay.
uh, maybe right before Markov. And his wife was Tatiana Grigorieva. She
Okay.
also jumped for Australia in, I think she was bronze in 2000 when Stacy won.
Yep. Yep.
And anyway, he was a really tall guy, 6'5" or 6'6", really fast, typical Russian vaulter. And I saw him jump uh, on some 520s from like five lefts.
Oh
But
my
those are probably
gosh.
the longest poles. And then Okert Brits had some pretty big poles in length. Bubka had some 525s and 530s.
Didn't you guys
Um,
make Mondo some 525s?
mhm, yeah, yeah,
But he jumped in Paris on 520?
mhm,
Interesting.
yeah. I think I think he has a 525. I'm not sure of the flexes. I want to say it's like an 11.5 and 11.3 maybe.
And that dude doesn't weigh a lot. That's
No,
crazy.
no. But we also, so again, biggest, we made some really stiff poles for some guys that were like 520, 9.8, something like that. Just monsters.
That's so
And
crazy.
those are like big guys, you know.
Yeah, right, right.
Well, like as an
Dude,
example,
that's
actually,
nuts.
we made 520, I want to say 11.1 maybe for well, I always mess up his name. Leo, the decathlete from Texas,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
German.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he jumped on
Dang.
those in Paris, 520, like 11, low 11s.
That is those are some big boys. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, I did want to talk about Reno. The
Yeah.
registration opened up yesterday, I think.
Monday.
Monday. Yeah,
Monday.
Monday it opened up.
Hmm.
Super exciting. And if anybody has not been to the Reno Pole Vault Summit, it's the best event, by far and away in pole vaulting. It's incredible. And I just curious just to touch on it. It must be insanely difficult to run. I'm sure it costs a ton of money, a ton of time, a ton of effort. Why go through that much effort um, for something like that?
I kind of
What
chuckle
keeps
because
you guys going?
we don't know any better. No, no, I'm just kidding. It's super fun. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's fun. It's really fun. I think it's a great thing to be a part of.
Hmm.
Um, we again, it, in the beginning, we sponsored a camp at Fresno, and then Coach Fraley, Bob Fraley at the time was like, "Oh, you guys should think about doing something in Reno." And we're like, "No one wants to come to Reno. There's no way." He's like, "No, Reno's a good place." Da, 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 da. And so they did, kind of a little gathering. And actually, so my dad and Lane were kind of talking about it, thinking about it, like, I don't know. Bob's kind of crazy. Like, are you sure you guys want to, I don't, there's no one's going to come to Reno.
Yeah.
But then they started thinking more about it and they thought, okay, so we make the polls, we have that and knowledge and experience, but really we have a big network, right? We talk
Mm.
to all these coaches, and at the time it's I think 1990-ish, 91 maybe when we did the camp in Fresno,
Hmm.
and it was either 93 or 94 um, when we did the summit in Reno,
Hmm.
and so it's the Bubka era, and it's Iron Curtain. I mean, it's a Cold War, like we don't have a lot of necessarily direct contact with the Soviet Union, but we're able to get polls to them. And my dad had developed a relationship with Petrov and Bubka, and um, he he's thinking about that, and he's like, well, what can, it's like pole vault is this niche thing. It's something that we all love. What can we do to kind of be a steward of the event? What can we do to bring back to this event that we all love?
Hmm.
And he's like, well, I have these relationships. Maybe I can kind of lean on some of the people we know and they can share their knowledge to the extent they want to.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how it started. And then it just every year kind of grew a little bit, grew a little bit, grew a little bit, grew a little bit until now it's just growing and growing. And it is kind of become this what it is now. In about actually it was again kind of COVID sort of changed some things because we had it in 2020 and then a few weeks later, the world shuts down.
Right.
So then 2021, everything's still pretty much on lockdown. So then 2022 comes along and we're kind of planning committee talking about it and we're thinking, maybe it's not because in 2021 we were considering I can't remember exactly all the, restrictions and laws and how it all played out, but there was kind of a moment where we thought, okay, I think we can do it and maintain the numbers and it'd just be a trimmed down version. And, I think it was like you could have, if the space was big enough, you could have like 200 people, but it
Yeah.
had to be all spread
Oh,
out. So we were kind of like, okay, maybe we can do this, and then we thought, well, maybe not. So anyway, because we kind of took that year off, it gave us a chance to really assess kind of what we're doing. And it, for a long time, it was kind of like, yeah, okay, more people, we'll figure it out. And then we got to a point where 15 pits, 2,200 people, I think it's like 2,000 athletes competing.
wow.
And, and we just got to a point where our planning committee was like, we can't, we can't give adequate instruction. We can't have an adequate positive experience for the people that are coming. Our staff is spread too thin and it wasn't as a quality event anymore. We felt
Mm.
like we were losing some things. So in 2022, we decided we're gonna go, I think it was 12 pits, I can't remember, but we decided this is going to be the number. And I think we found our sweet spot in that. And so now last year we had to cut off registration early. We'll have to do it again this year, unfortunately. So if you haven't signed up, make sure you do it early,
Yeah.
um, because it's just, we want to be able to create an environment that positive information is being exchanged. Kids have the opportunity to get additional instruction to the extent they want it and they feel comfortable with it. And we want to have the numbers that we can give kids attention. We can sit,
Yeah.
the staff can talk to the kid and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing you do, blah, blah, blah. Whereas if it gets too big, you kind of lose some quality in the instruction.
Yeah, that's funny because we actually have been meeting our staff at Rise has been meeting about, our trip to Reno, and it's we went through the same thing.
Yeah.
Where it was like,
Yeah.
okay, so how many people can we travel with where the experience is what we want it to be? And the way that we look at Reno at Rise is you could if a kid goes to Rise, you can create a pole vaulter for or goes to Rise, goes to Reno, you can create a pole vaulter for life. Like even when they're done pole vaulting, they'll love pole vaulting because
Oh,
of
that's
that.
cool.
I really do think that that experience at Reno is so profound to the athletes that go, whether they do well or they don't do well in the competition part. I think just being there is incredibly special and motivating,
That's
and
cool.
it's an insane thing. But we were like, what's that number? Like, what's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
number? Like, because it's like if we bring 60 athletes out there, it's gonna be a nut show. Like, because we offer a package, we call it Roll with Rise.
Oh,
So
nice.
they roll with Rise to Reno, and they get the transportation of the poles, the use of the poles, the coaching, and then we kind of facilitate their it's like going to Disney World now. Like you need to hire out like a Disney World manager to
Yeah.
plan your vacation. And
Oh,
so we
man.
kind of we kind of do that. And we were like, all right, well, like how are we gonna if we got that many people out there, how are we gonna get that many poles out there
Yeah.
so that people
Yeah.
are not stuck, using poles. So we had to hire pole runners uh to bring
This
pole
is the
runners
whole
out there.
legit operation,
So
man.
it's like it really is a legit operation now, planning your trip to Reno, which is so cool that
It's
that
crazy to think
exists
that is
inside
crazy.
of the pole vaulting world, where
Well,
it's like our I mean we
it's
we put so much time into it. It's so cool.
it's really humbling to hear that side of it because we hope that we put together a good event and um, but you never know what other people go through or to get there. But it's just a really it just warms me. It fills me up to
Yeah.
hear that that's the impact that it has for kids and
And
clubs and
it's
coaches.
it's it's unbelievable what you guys have done. It's so much fun. Like you said, and you and I have talked about it actually, out at Reno, where it's like, yeah, it's like a different, like from your side of things and then our side of things, it's like a different type of fun. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
hard type of fun,
yeah. Oh, dude,
where
we're every year after the summit, we ask the same question, like on basically Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday after the summit. Like that's about when things are sort of starting to settle because
right,
we load out, we disassemble all the runways and pits, and we're out by about midnight Saturday night. But there's always some leftover residual stuff. There's little odds and ends that we have to go pick up, and then we got to move out of the hotel, do all that stuff. So by, like Wednesday, we've usually kind of had some time to like sleep a little
hmm
bit. And every year we're like, why do we do this? But but I I don't know. It is fun and it's fun to plan. It's there's always little challenges. This year we're moving to a new hotel
yeah.
and we've been at this hotel in the past. We actually used to vault in the hotel.
Okay, that's what I was
They
wondering. So I vaulted at Reno 2005 and 2006. So was that the one where we had the crisscross runway where there was the
Yes.
crisscross? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um,
so
yeah.
so there's a couple of nuances with that, but we won't do any vaulting at the hotel this year.
Yeah.
Um, who knows where it's going to go, but
hmm
so we're familiar with the hotel, but there's challenges, right? Like right now I'm kind of figuring out there's another group in the hotel at the same time that's
Ooh,
not as big as our group,
yeah.
but so it just means that they're using up some of the convention space that we were hoping to use. So now we have a little bit of a challenge in where to put the pieces, and we're considering some shifts in the programming. We're thinking about offering a little bit different layout and structure for the coaches sessions, where maybe we do a couple of concurrent sessions where, we're maybe it's a challenge to know what level of information people are seeking,
hmm
because I think there's coaches that operate at a really high level and they want to know the really technical ins and outs of what's Mondo doing, what's Nina doing, what's you know who's doing this and things like that. And then I think there's other coaches that are coming to it and they're like, I've never coached pole vault in my life and I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? So
Right.
those are two different conversations, and we're always trying to kind of stay relevant and up on kind of new rules and new things that are happening and trying to address different things. And I mean, you and I've talked about a few different topics to cover, and so we're playing with an idea of doing that. So now I'm looking at, okay, it's a different timing structure, it's a different location. How many people can we fit in this room? And kind of the same thing, right? You don't always want to have a big lecture hall with, I think the coaches last year were 300 coaches and like 500 parents. And so we do a parent session and you get 500 people in one spot. Sometimes that's not a great presentation.
Yeah.
So, we're kicking around some different ideas. So it's fun to try to put those pieces together, and it's fun to try to think about, okay, who can be a relevant speaker? What subjects are people going to be interested in? And I don't know, it's just I don't want to say a rite of passage for pole vaulters, but it's like, it's something that we want to keep.
Yeah.
I guess at the end of the day, for me, it's about growing the event and growing the sport and getting more people interested. And I think this is one piece to that very big puzzle.
hmm and that it's like what I was saying earlier is, our main goal is to figure out like what's the number, what of people that we want to travel with, what's the service that we want to offer them, and like what is how can we set up our chances best to provide an experience for them that they become a pole vaulter for life. Like
Yeah.
how can we do that? What are the things that we can do? And I'm sure that's probably the exact same things that you guys are thinking. Like,
I
how
was
can
just
we
going to
make
ask
this the
you,
experience of their lifetime? You
what
know?
can we provide to your kids to make sure that we're making them fans?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys do an incredible job. I think just the fact that you guys have just been consistently doing this and you just even having it, it's like what you're talking about earlier, just showing up for your kids, just having it. Number one, you've already done 80% of the work. Like just having the event and having it go off relatively with relatively low number of hitches, which it's impossible to run an event that big without some things going off the rails, from time to time. But
Mm.
I mean, that elite vault, like that is incredible, for everyone. I know that everyone really loves that. And I think last year you guys had some stuff for parents too, because I think there's a lot of people in the US that the parent becomes they don't want to, but they're just like, hey, I guess I'm gonna have to coach my kid because there's no coach at the high school type of thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like covering the bases of like that'd be hard task. Covering the bases of we
Mm.
got these people that want to learn about these really high level things, and then other things that people, are just now getting introduced to the sport. Yeah, it's insane.
No.
One of these days, you and I have talked about maybe me doing something out there and talking. I would love to get in front of, maybe not in front of, but maybe just like have a conversation with people who are interested in doing kind of what we're doing at Rise. Like showing them that it's not impossible. You can make a living at this, um and showing them that it's a very rewarding thing to do. And that's always been one of my kind of passions, is like, hey, like this is so crazy to me. Like I wasn't supposed to do this wasn't supposed to be my lot in life. I was just supposed to be a teacher until I
Be like my
retired.
dad, man.
Yeah, this I wasn't supposed to do this. And then I just find myself here. And then I know that there's people out there that could do an incredible job, doing things like this. But just talking, man, I think that is a high is a huge part of it too. Is just being together and just being able to talk with other people who are involved in the same things that you are, who come up against the same challenges. I think that's why you and I, when we get on the phone, it ends up lasting a lot longer than what we thought. It's just because it's like an outlet. It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
this guy's doing the same thing as I'm doing, thinking about, but he's over, in Nevada. Like
Yeah.
it's cool. It's just cool to get together. And like
I
I
think
said,
that's
yeah.
that's also partly why I think the pole vault community is what it is, right? It's the
Hmm.
same sort of there's no really better term than the camaraderie of it, right? And I think about it in terms of the competitors side of it too, like um I don't know, like Nina and Katie, right? They're competitors, but they're friends and they're going about it different ways. Like, I'm a little better
Right.
at doing this. So I think if I do this in my jump, but then about that. And I don't know, I think just having that ability to bounce ideas off of people that are in trying to put together a similar puzzle as you
Hmm.
is so helpful. And it creates that sort of bonding agency that not a lot of things do,
Yeah. That's exactly it.
you know?
Yeah, and the Reno Pole Vault Summit is just kind of the start to the year, and just it's like I said, it's like Disney World, man. You
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
if- we got a full planning service that we offer here at Riot for Reno for the Reno
Okay,
Pole
you
Vault
got to
Summit.
do this, you got to do that. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, Jake, but your planning service just got blown up because you're going to have to
Y-
replan everything because it's a new. A new venue, you
Yeah, I'm
know.
excited though. I saw that yesterday because we push out like this email, this big long informational email to all the people on our mailing list, and I contacted Luke and I was like, "Hey, did you see that they switched it to that it's not the Nugget anymore?" And he was like, no." And we went on the website and we were like, "Oh, dang, yeah, they're switching it up." It's just too.
Yeah.
It was Nugget was just too small, or
Yeah, they were amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. Like their whole staff treated us so well, and everything, they provided some really great perks and services that, a lot of hotels wouldn't, like
Mhm.
they would do the extra cash bars, like the lunch bar and the breakfast bar and stuff outside the ballroom and things like that. And,
Right.
some of our big challenges with the hotel were really, it was enough places to eat, I think was a
Mm.
big bottleneck. Um, and, they've gone through some renovations and some different things. Um, but really what it came down to was just not quite enough space. And especially with this idea of toying with concurrent sessions, we're kind of maxing out their convention hall space. The other thing was the kind of the intermediate activity sessions rooms were getting a little bit crowded. So trying to kind of figure that out. Um, and so the areas that the Nugget couldn't quite take care of, the Grand Sierra can.
Mm.
They're they have a lot of convention space and they have a ton of different restaurant options. They have like their kind of hotel restaurant row, which is sort of like casino level. That's like your sit down places, and they got like a Mexican food place, a cafe, a sports bar, a really nice steakhouse if that's what you're into, a nice like Asian bistro. But then
That's
they have a
awesome.
whole nother like downstairs level that has easy grab and go, like a deli sandwich place and a hamburger place, pizza place. Um,
That's
they have
great.
a they have a bunch of recreation, like a really neat arcade and laser tag place, and they have a golf thing, and I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. So it'll
That's
be
awesome.
exciting. One of my worries is with the high school kids is that there's it's kind of I think they might even call it a fun zone, but there's like a bunch of stuff downstairs, and I'm like, I just hope these kids don't just go nuts and like,
Let's be respectful,
they're
kids.
playing laser tag and running
Yeah,
around. They come out to jump Saturday and they're just dead. Like
right.
those are kind of some of the things that I worry about a little bit. But
We were in
um,
the we were me and Luke were in the hotel. This is maybe 2 years ago, and I Luke was like scrolling through Instagram or something, and this is late at night.
oh
And
man,
I was like, and he was like, "Dude, look at this." And it was like there was an enormous number of people in the pool, and
oh,
and they were taking like the rise athletes that were there were launching each other at like triple backflips in the pool, and I'm like, dude, come on, man. And I didn't want to be that old guy that like went into into the pool and was like, "Hey, you kids, knock it off.
in your in
Go
your
back to your
pajamas.
rooms." Oh man, they had a blast though. I mean, they'll never forget it. They'll never forget it.
Yeah,
Nobody got hurt, thankfully,
yeah,
and
thankfully,
we did it. But
yeah,
anyway, we've been going for a long time. I think it's
yeah.
probably
It's
time to bust
been a
out of
good one.
here.
Yeah, we'll have
Yeah,
to do another one, I guess.
yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to finish up with? Anything new and exciting, or get your
Um,
orders into Spirit early this year?
Yeah, I mean, from a whole production perspective, we're in a really, really good place. We've got a good supply chain flow is really nice. We're in a production period, so we're ramping up production so we can make sure we have the poles you need when you need them. I would expect our lead times to be really quick turnarounds throughout the whole season.
That's great.
Um, it's been an unbelievable year. Like just the performances and watching track all year, whether it's from all the way from like indoor season, college, high school into the Olympic Games, and now, getting ready for next week will be the Diamond League final. Those guys are
Can't believe they're still
still
jumping.
rolling.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
It's just been so exciting to watch and be a part of. It's been really, really fun. Um,
Yeah,
I have to say, I think just from a fan perspective, like this year has been just remarkable. Just been so fun,
unbelievable.
you know.
Unbelievable. Congratulations too on the Olympic golds there.
Yeah, I'll
Uh
take all the credit. No, I
it's
mean, look,
pretty cool though.
Mondo is those athletes and what they're doing is just I can't say enough about it. I mean, I in Oregon at the World Champs, Nina was third,
Hmm.
and I just remember kind of thinking like she's she's bringing some fire, man. Like, and you can't say that it really came out of nowhere because she
Yeah.
she also jumped really well. I speaking of like polls and things like that, that's one of the really fun and challenging things of the job is, sometimes it comes down to getting polls to a place, uh, and it's going to be tough, and we got to figure out how to do it. Sometimes it's easy to ship it somewhere, and we have an agent that can help get it through customs and do all this stuff. So in 2018, I think it was Birmingham, the Birmingham World Championships indoors. I brought four poles, two for Nina and two for Piotr Lisek.
Hmm.
And so because I had these poles for Nina, I'm like, oh, Nina Kennedy, okay, cool. And I was kind of watching and keeping an eye on her, and she jumped okay. I didn't think she, blew it out of the water, but ever since then, I've always kind of been like, okay, I wonder, what's going to happen here, this and that. And I think once you meet somebody and you have that opportunity and that kind of connection, it's really nice to kind of, I don't know, you follow it through a little bit more sometimes.
Right.
And then the other one was Mosier. She had got some lights turned on.
There we go.
Um, she has had an outstanding year also, and so I was like so curious to see how it's going to play out at the games because having watched the two of them and then kind of the little bit of a I don't want to say rivalry, but in a certain way, I think both Katie and Nina coming into this season after having shared the championship last year,
Hmm.
I think they both were kind of like, I want this. This is,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
on. And so that was like just so fun to kind of watch all that unfold. Um,
Yeah.
it's
It's
just been really cool, man.
unbelievable. Yeah, it's a great time to be a pole vaulter. That's for sure.
Oh, for
It's a
sure,
lot
for
different
sure.
than whenever we were growing up. It's a different space. It's just insane. So
I
very
was
grateful.
I was doing some like data mining the other day, and I got interested because Corrales jumped 6 meters, so he's the
Mhm.
29th man to go 6 meters, and I'm like, yeah, that's crazy. So I just kind of geeked out on 6 meters. And then I'm like, well, okay, so with the women, you got 5 meters, but it's not equivalent.
Right.
It's just
Right.
not. It's probably more close to say 20 feet. Girl that jumps 5 meters. There's
Yeah,
only,
I would say that's probably closer.
well, more vaulters have jumped 5 meters than 20 feet,
Mhm.
or I should say more women have jumped 5 meters than men have 20 feet. Um, but 20 feet is, you know, 20 feet, three guys, like crazy. And then, four women, they've done it more times. Well, I take that back, but because Mondo's jumped, it's ridiculous. But anyway, so I was trying to figure it out, and the thing that I noticed that's kind of wild is the concentration of competitors on the women's side and the number of times that they jump, say, 480 and above. So like I think it's 30 women have
Yeah.
gone 480, but they've done it almost like 200 sometimes.
Wow.
Whereas, men have gone, 30 of them have gone 6 meters. And it's like, actually, times is a misnomer too, but meets, we'll say meets, 480 competitions that they've jumped 480 or above. It's like this crazy concentration, I think 200 plus. Whereas
Wow.
on the men's side, 30, 30 guys, 29 guys going 6 meters, and it's been done in like 110 meets or so.
Right.
So it's an interesting, I don't know, it's just an interesting statistical comparison where
That is interesting.
it's almost like the women have reached a level that's it's a certain level, but they're able to sustain it more times, more over a longer period of time, maybe. I'm not sure. I haven't
Right.
charted out the time yet,
Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
like the men that have gone 6 meters, I think it's 10 or so have done it more than one time, and the
Wow.
rest have only done it once.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It seems like the 6 meter club is a lot of times it's a
Mhm.
one-off jump. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So it's
interesting.
just interesting to kind of like follow these stats and look at it and check it out and like track it. Um, yeah, I don't
Hey,
know.
you are getting
Cool.
in deep, aren't you?
I know, totally. But it's exciting. That's the thing that's exciting, right? I think
Yeah.
I would expect, I mean, right now there's more 6 meter vaulters currently jumping than ever,
Hmm.
which, I mean, that's amazing. And then on the women's side, there's probably more 480 jumpers than ever. And so I'm really kind of, uh, I'm anticipating and I'm really excited to see the development unfold on the women's side and what that trajectory is going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be an interesting one.
Because
Yeah,
I
and then the
have,
other thing too is like the women, they haven't been vaulting for as long either. Like as a group,
mhm,
like
for sure.
it's hasn't happened for as long of a period of time. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that the growth of clubs in the United States is going to continue to. I think this is the first generation that we've seen where the majority of people vaulting at that level either have uh out of the ordinary access, like
Yeah.
Mondo and his dad, Sam and his dad, uh, whatever, or Chris, and he's a club guy, Casey, club guy. Like, so I think we're seeing that first wave of people who have had access to facilities and opportunity more than what it was when we were younger. And I
Sure.
think that's one of
Sure.
the reasons. And I think that it's just going to get even crazier. I really do think it's going to get crazier in the next 10 years or whatever.
Yeah, I think opportunity is a big part. And I think the next part is what effort is made on the fundamental components of the vault,
Yeah.
right? Like if you just come and jump every day and you jump with bad habits, you're going to reach a level and you're going to plateau, and that's going to be
Mhm.
the level. And I think it's a lower level than it would be if taught the proper fundamentals
Yeah.
out of the beginning.
We,
Another thing that
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the things I've been really interested in too is tracking vaulters over time and
Mhm.
seeing to what level and degree they're able to make changes.
Mm. That's a
So
tough one because the further you go in it, that's a
mhm,
lot more difficult.
totally.
We,
Well, and
uh, we,
that's
we,
the
we,
point of
st-
the
we started
foundation.
a class here just talking about the fundamentals. We started a specific class called pole vault fundamentals at
Oh, nice.
Rise. Like, so it's like a thing that you can join, and that was the exact conversation that we had. Is it's like, man, I feel like the majority of the time we're cleaning up bad habits instead of like, so let's make an
Mhm.
effort to push people into like that are young and like just learning how to pole vault. Like, let's push them into instead of maybe the general class, which the general class still works well, but let's push them into a fundamentals class where we really can just hammer home those basic fundamentals that we know are going to really catch up to them once they get to a certain level, like pole carry and planting of the pole and things like that, and running with a pole and those things. Like if you have a good foundation in that, whew, you could get really good.
Well, I think the hardest challenge that you're going to run into is that fundamentals are fairly boring, right?
They are, and that's the problem is that we put specific, like we have a whole curriculum for it and everything, like, and there's a specific spot that that class goes to, and then it doesn't go past that spot.
Gotcha.
And
And then
so
they, yeah,
like, and there's a specific protocol that they go through every single day to reinforce all of these different things. We could do this first, and then we do this second, and then we do this third, and then we do this fourth,
yeah,
and we just reinforce it. And that there has been people who have dropped out who have just been like, I'm this is really boring. And I'm
yeah.
like, well, sorry.
So that's the biggest. I think that's one of the hard. I would say, and I'm an outsider, so I'd be curious in your thoughts on this. But I understand we got time here. But
Yeah.
um, I would imagine from a club or gym perspective, providing information that keeps kids coming back and excitement and I just think any sport, whatever it is, when you're working on the very foundation of it, it can start to feel monotonous. And
Yeah.
so from a club's perspective, like how do you keep kids engaged so that they continue to develop those foundational elements?
Yeah.
Because I
And oh, go ahead.
nope, after you.
I was gonna say, I think the biggest answer to that question is staffing. Is Are your coaches, if you're a good coach, you can make a boring thing a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you're a good coach, if you're a good coach and you're engaging and you're somebody that those kids want to come and be around, then it doesn't matter what
Mhm.
you're telling them. It doesn't matter
Yeah,
if you're working on three-step
that's a
plant
good point.
drills the whole day. If
Yeah.
it's fun and it's engaging and you're asking them how their day was and hey, what's going on at school or this, that, and all of a sudden it becomes a hangout where everyone's having a good time, but we're also learning these fundamental boring things at the
Yeah.
same time. So I think
Yeah,
I
that
think staffing is the biggest hurdle in that, because if you get with a boring coach teaching boring things, you're not going to last very long.
can be tough. Yeah. No, for sure. Well, that's kind of it, right? Like, next thing you know, you're shooting the bull with the coach. Next thing you know, you've done 10,000 reps of
Yep,
whatever,
that's what
and
it
and
is.
done them well, right? Like that's another component. But I
100%.
I think that's one of the things that, again, the job I've been really fortunate to be able to spend time with some really prominent people who are considered, greatest coaches of all time. And some of the things that I notice is how they are able to develop these skills that are very basic skills, very foundational skills. There's no magic, right? They just
Mhm.
come and they grind and they do the basics and they do it over and over again. And then they build on top of that one. And then they build on top of this one. And then they get to a point where if you're off, they hammer you for it. And then you got to go back and do it again.
Mhm.
But there's no excuse for time in,
Yeah,
right?
right?
But as an athlete, that can be really difficult. So having the skill set
Hard.
to try to do that, I think,
Yeah, a
I don't
lot
know.
of it boils down to the coach and staffing, like picking good people. Like there's two young ladies that run that pole vault fundamentals class that we developed this curriculum for. Like we sat down and we were like, okay, so let's take all these years of, you know, the things that we find are the most important, and let's create a curriculum and a system that they can go through. And then it's just like, a machine. It's just like if they go
Mhm.
through the machine, then they're good. Like as long as you go through the machine, you're going to come out the other side good. And so we've
Yeah,
created this program. And then the most important piece of that puzzle was these two young ladies that are the right personality, the right
yeah,
personality
good.
that are fun to be around. They are young coaches that still have a lot to learn, but that's easy. That's so easy to teach somebody like, hey, we're going to, I give you this curriculum and they're going to get better as a coach the more they do it, but it's so hard to teach somebody a personality.
Yeah,
It's
you
it's
can't.
so
I mean,
hard. You can't
you
do
can't. I
that.
I think about this sometimes. I had a balding disc in my back, right? And I went and I saw this guy who's really good, uh, what do you call it? Like foundational movement guy.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like I get up pretty early naturally anyway, so like I have these classes at like 5 in the morning, you know.
Right.
So I go to the gym and he's always been, he's always on and just like I'm like, man, that would be so hard. Because he does like personal training and stuff too, you know. And so we're doing this stretching and exercises and different stuff, and he's kind of running me through it, you know, and it's just like being an athlete again, you know, your coach is doing his thing. And
Yeah.
I just, I'm thinking, man, to have that ability to just be like on and with people, and it just takes a certain skill set, you know, and certain people
Yeah.
have it and certain people don't. And like you said, I think it's like a lot of things, right? You learn it over time. The more you do it, the better at it you get.
Exactly. And it's my job to try to find those people, and that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Anyway,
that's got to be the toughest part about your situation.
it is, but it's fun too. But
Yeah.
anyway, let's wrap this
All right.
up. I got some stuff to do. I think you got some stuff to do, and we'll wrap it up for today though. Any
All right.
parting
Thanks for
words?
having me.
Any like where can people like follow Spirit or any of that stuff? Like, do you guys have like with your Instagram, and where can
Sure.
people
Yeah.
find information on Reno?
So the Pole Vault Summit website, polevaultsummit.org, uh, we try to keep that updated as much as we can. You can find the registration link through that. The button is just right on the top of the front page. Pricing and stuff is down below if you want to check that out. We duplicate the pricing and stuff on the registration page as well.
Mhm.
So once you click the link, then you can go to the bottom and see those prices and stuff, or just sign up the people. Follow us at Spirit Poles Fly on Instagram. Actually, I think it's
Beautiful.
Spirit Poles Fly High, maybe. And yeah, we just try to
Awesome.
post, some content that we find is interesting. We're not like super great at shouting from the hilltops about all the stuff that we're trying to get done or do, but we try to post relevant stuff, and if we find some exciting news or something, we'll always try to post it. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate your time. And this is the One More Jump podcast. See you guys later.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jake.